Chapter 1932. That's right. Our teacher not only dampened the Turk's spirit, but also boosted the prestige of the Tang dynasty. He is indeed worthy of being our teacher. Hao Chujun nodded and gave Zhang Feng a thumbs up. Then he seemed to think of something and his eyes flashed with pride. But this time we also contributed. Wasn't this hot air balloon made by me and Ma Zhou in cooperation with our teacher? In fact, Zhang Feng was quite pleased with their words at the beginning. After all, they were praising him. There was nothing wrong with it. However, when he heard the latter part, he felt something was wrong. This guy seemed to be asking for credit. What hot air balloon was made by you and Lao Tzu? I was the one who did it. You guys were just helping me out from the side. But now it's all thanks to you? Not only that, when the hot air balloon was mentioned, he remembered the embarrassing incident of being treated as a child beggar in Chang'an. Now these two guys actually had the face to ask for credit. He frowned and pulled a long face. You two brats, now you have the face to talk about the hot air balloon in front of me? Don't you know that the hot air balloon? At this point he realized something was wrong and quickly changed the topic. Humph, the hot air balloon is not good to begin with. You still have the face to talk about it? Hearing this, Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun were a little confused. Their teacher clearly took the hot air balloon to Xingzhou. Why did he turn around and say that the hot air balloon was not good? This was a classic example of not admitting it after putting on his pants. However, they did not dare to say this, especially Ma Zhou. He was timid and had already retreated to the side. Hao Chujun chuckled and scratched his head. Teacher, how can you blame us for this? Zhang Feng was unhappy when he heard this. How can I not blame you? You don't know how to study it properly and only idle around. Teacher, enough. Zhang Feng stopped in time and glanced at the two. Let's not talk about this. Prepare the materials. We will start to improve the hot air balloon. Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun were a little confused, but they still nodded and went to prepare the materials. At the same time in Zhang Mansion. When Cheng Chumo and the others woke up, they discovered a problem. Zhang Feng had disappeared. Motherf asterisk her, this brat couldn't have slipped away, right? Don't want to take responsibility? His injuries were all caused by this fellow. If he didn't see him now, who would he look for in the future? Moreover, they had worked together to blow up the Turkic camp. No matter how you looked at it, they would be rewarded when the time came. They had already decided to go to the battlefield, and back then Feng Zi had promised them heavy armor. He wanted to give the insect light cavalry and turn Wei Zi into an assassin. Now that this brat had slipped away, who was he going to find to fulfill his promise? Thinking of this, they couldn't help but vent their anger. She rushed out of the guest room and wanted to settle accounts with Zhang Feng. At this moment they bumped into Du Ziding. Cheng Chumo knew that this was the Zhang family's lackey, so he grabbed Du Ziding's neck with one hand and said fiercely, Du, where did Feng Zi go? Du Ziding was a little confused. Wasn't everything fine yesterday? Why was this group of people so ferocious today? Did old master owe them money? Or did he offend them? If that was the case, then he couldn't reveal old master's whereabouts. Thinking of this, he patted Cheng Chumo's shoulder and said earnestly, Did old master owe you money? I'll give it to you. Don't be so impatient, let the old man down first. After saying this, he moved his legs and was about to break free from Cheng Chumo's grip. Cheng Chumo increased his strength and didn't allow him to break free. He shouted, Old man, don't be so sarcastic with Lao Tzu. Feng Zi doesn't owe us money, but this fellow is even more despicable than that. Hurry up and tell me, where is he? Yes, hurry up and tell me. Du Go and Zhang Sunchong were like foxes borrowing the tiger's might to intimidate others. They were very arrogant. Du Ziding originally thought that it was just a small amount of money, but it seemed like it wasn't. Looking at these people's fierce expressions, old master must have offended them. He had never seen such a scene before. Usually, everyone was respectful when they saw him. Now that he met these people, if he had known, he wouldn't have let old master bring them back. What the hell? Although he was cursing in his heart, he was already scared stiff. His face was pale as he said with a trembling voice, Masters, how would I know where old master went? If I offended you in the past, please forgive me. Just treat it as a fart, okay? These people still hadn't said what they wanted from old master. What if they wanted to harm old master? He couldn't say it even if he was beaten to death. You won't say it? Cheng Chumo frowned and was somewhat dissatisfied. He increased the strength of his hand. If you don't say it, Lao Tzu will beat the shit out of you. Let's see if you can still be so stubborn then. After saying this, he raised his huge right palm and swung it. Du Ziding only felt his vision go black. A palm leaf fan-like palm swung over. Chapter 1933. Slap. The slap was crisp and clear. Du Ziding saw stars in front of his eyes. Before he could react, his thin and weak body fell to the ground. He felt that his old waist was about to break. Then he screamed like a pig being slaughtered. This scream quickly attracted a group of servants. They knew that it was the housekeeper's voice and rushed over with weapons in their hands. However, would Ching Chumo let Du Ziding off so easily? He hadn't achieved his goal yet. He strode in front of Du Ziding and grabbed him again. He shouted, "Hurry up and speak." Du Ziding felt a sweetness in his throat. It was as if something was moving in his mouth. He stuck his tongue out and saw a tooth fall out. He was shocked. "My tooth?" Ching Chumo didn't have the time to care about this. He continued to shout, "I'm asking you a question. Where did Fengzi go?" Du Ziding was really scared this time. He originally thought that he could solve this problem with money. How did it end up like this? If he had known, he would have said it earlier. Master was so smart. He shouldn't be in trouble. He thought for a moment and his body trembled. Master went to Shao Mountain. Shao Mountain? Ching Chumo frowned. He turned around and glanced at Zhang Sun and Du Ziding. He then looked at Du Ziding and said coldly, "You're not lying to us, right?" I wouldn't dare. Du Ziding shook his head. Blood flowed down the corner of his mouth. Ching Chumo turned around and gave Zhang Sun and Du Ziding a look. Then he let go of Du Ziding and ran out. The poor Du Ziding staggered. If it wasn't for the servants supporting him, he would have fallen to the ground. On the other hand, Ching Chumo and the others bought a few horses and rushed to Shao Mountain. They first went to White Deer College. However, they didn't find any trace of Zhang Feng. This made them furious. They thought that the old fox Du Ziding had lied to them. It wasn't until they heard a group of people talking about the dean going to the research institute that they understood. Wasn't the dean Fengzi? He went to the research institute? Thinking of this, everyone rushed back to the research institute. When he arrived at the research institute, he saw Zhang Feng leading Ma Zhou and the others in an experiment. They hurriedly went up and shouted, "Fengzi, Fengzi." Fengzi frowned. Why did this voice sound so familiar? He turned around and saw that it was Ching Chumo and the others. He instantly lost all interest because he knew that these fellows were definitely up to no good. He said with a helpless expression, "Why are you guys here? Didn't the doctor tell you to rest well?" Upon hearing this, Ching Chumo jumped 8 feet into the air and glared at him. "You still have the cheek to say that? Why did you run away and leave us in the Zhang mansion? Tell me, do you not want to take responsibility for us?" "Stop." Zhang Feng quickly waved his hand and rolled his eyes. "What do you mean by taking responsibility? You make it sound like Lao Tzu did something to you." After saying that, he crossed his arms and said with some dissatisfaction, "Tell me honestly, why are you looking for me? Isn't this attitude good enough?" Zhang Sun smiled and took a step forward. It was unknown if he didn't see Zhang Feng's dissatisfaction or if he did it on purpose, but he acted as if he didn't care at all. He said shamelessly, "Fengzi, look, we went to Xingzhou together this time and even blew up the Turkic camp. Didn't we make a great contribution?" Something was wrong? This was Zhang Feng's first reaction. When these fellows went there, each of them was more afraid than the other and almost peed their pants. Now that they were finally back, they were actually concerned about the Turkic matter. What great contribution was this? Could it be that these fellows still wanted to enter the government? That shouldn't be possible. These fellows were usually lazy and gluttonous. It was impossible for them to change today. What was going on? Thinking of this, he looked at everyone with a strange expression. "We did make a great contribution. So what?" "That's right." Du Go clapped his hands and said excitedly, "Fengzi, do you still remember the promise you made to us in the past?" "Promise?" Zhang Feng frowned and didn't understand. What promise did he make to these fellows in the past? He couldn't help but ask, "What promise? Did you guys eat the wrong medicine? Are you trying to go back on your words?" Ching Chumo grabbed Zhang Feng and stared at him. "Did you forget that you want to turn me into a heavy cavalry?" "Heavy cavalry?" Zhang Feng's eyes turned. His memory was a little fuzzy. He seemed to have said it before. It seemed that he didn't just promise Ching Chumo, he also promised Buggy to turn him into a light cavalry. That's right, there was also Wei Zi. He wanted to turn this fellow into an assassin. Thinking of this, he smiled and pushed away Ching Chumo's hand. "I thought it was something else. Isn't it just this? Then when are you going to fulfill your promise? Give me the heavy cavalry." Ching Chumo was excited. He pulled Zhang Feng's hand and said with a smile, "Now that I have made a great contribution, it is the best time to go to the military camp." Zhang Feng didn't reply. Instead, he put his hands behind his back and looked at the sky. He seemed to be deep in thought and occasionally stole glances behind him. It wasn't that he didn't want to give it, but that he couldn't. Now that the forging workshop was making guns, where would he have the time to make these things? Chapter 1934. Moreover, even if it was made, these guys would definitely squander it all in a few days. This price was a bit too high. Now that he thought about it, why did he have to promise this? His mouth was really cheap. However, at this moment, Ching Chimo's urging voice came from behind. Feng Zi, why are you dawdling? Are you thinking of going back on your word? Who the F***ck is going back on his word? Zhang Feng suddenly turned around and stared at everyone. Is Lao Tzu such a person? Really? You're not? Then who is? Cheng Chimo was a bit unconvinced and pouted. You. Zhang Feng was about to curse. Zhang Sun Chong, who was standing at the side, hurriedly stepped forward and grabbed him. He said fawningly, Feng Zi, Iron Bull is like this. It's not like you don't know. Why don't you just give us the things? After saying that, he saw that Zhang Feng's expression was not right and added, Feng Zi, don't tell me you don't have it? Who the F***ck doesn't have it? Zhang Feng frowned and was very dissatisfied. They actually looked down on Lao Tzu and even wanted to make Lao Tzu lose points in front of the students. How could this be? He said angrily, I can't give it to you for now because Lao Tzu is now modifying the hot air balloon. Yes, the hot air balloon. We'll talk about it later. Hot air balloon? The three of them were stunned. They surrounded the equipment on the ground and looked at it. They were talking about the heavy armor just now and did not pay attention to this thing. Now that they looked at it, wasn't this the same as the hot air balloon? It was this thing that caused them to fall to the ground and be treated as beggars. Why was this guy still researching this thing? Cheng Chimo turned to look at Zhang Feng and was a bit angry. Feng Zi, why are you doing this thing again? Do you think you haven't harmed enough people? If it wasn't for this thing, we wouldn't have fallen from the sky. At this point, Zhang Feng hurriedly rushed forward and covered Cheng Chimo's mouth, and quickly gave him a look. Cheng Chimo was a little confused. He looked at Zhang Feng and saw that Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun were looking at him curiously, as if they were looking forward to what was to come. He immediately understood and winked at Zhang Feng. Only then did Zhang Feng loosen his grip. He let out a long sigh and corrected himself. Have you forgotten how badly this thing has caused us? What's going on now? Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Cheng Chimo and said snappily, if it weren't for these hot air balloons, would you have been able to perform meritorious deeds? Can you blow up the Turkic camp? You really have no conscience. Cheng Chimo chuckled and scratched his head in embarrassment. He knew that Feng Zi's words made sense, but he was still a little unhappy. Every time he thought of the hot air balloon falling on him, he felt disgusted. Zhang Sun was a little smarter. Seeing that Cheng Chimo had nothing to say, he laughed and said, Feng Zi, then why are you making this hot air balloon again? Don't tell me you want to blow up the Turkic camp again? Blow up your sister. Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Zhang Sun and said snappily, have you all forgotten what happened last time? This time, I want to modify the hot air balloon again to avoid the danger last time, understand? Zhang Sun nodded, not quite understanding. Then he thought of something and asked, if you're making hot air balloons here, what about our heavy armor and light cavalry? Hearing this, Cheng Chimo was also interested. Yes, if Feng Zi kept making hot air balloons here, then his heavy armor would be ruined soon. Thus he quickly asked, Feng Zi, you can't do this. You can make hot air balloons in the future and I can help you personally. Now you have to help me make the heavy armor. Dugo also nodded. Although he didn't get a share of these things as brothers, he naturally hoped that Tainyo and the others would get something. In the future, when he wanted to play, he could just borrow it. Zhang Feng shook his head disapprovingly. You don't understand. There are many problems with hot air balloons now, and they must be improved immediately. Otherwise, they won't be able to be used in the future. Moreover, I promised Lao Li to make one for him to see. When everyone heard Lao Li, they instantly understood what was going on. Feng Zi didn't know who Lao Li was, but they knew. Since His Majesty wanted to see it, it meant that His Majesty also attached great importance to it. Then this couldn't be delayed. However, what about their heavy armor and light cavalry? Were they going to just let it go? The three of them looked at each other, their eyes filled with unwillingness. In the end, it was Cheng Chimo who spoke. Feng Zi, since you want to do this, then we have nothing to say. What about the heavy armor and light cavalry you promised us? You can't just let it go, right? Zhang Feng had a headache. Why were these guys so obsessed with heavy armor? He let out a long sigh. How about this? Let's talk about it after I finish modifying the hot air balloons. Right now, the forge is making guns. Don't worry, I'll give it to you sooner or later. When the three of them heard this, they felt that this was Feng Zi's final compromise. There was no other way. After all, His Majesty also wanted to see it, so they could only nod and agree. Zhang Feng finally let out a sigh of relief. Since there's no problem, you guys should hurry up and leave. I feel annoyed just looking at you. No, we can't leave. Cheng Chimo's head twitched, his face filled with reluctance. Chapter 1935. This confused Zhang Feng. He asked subconsciously, why? Why don't you guys leave? Cheng Chimo rolled his eyes. What if you run away again after we leave? Chang, and is so big it's not easy for us to find you. Zhang Feng finally understood what was going on. These guys just wanted to follow him. They looked like misers, afraid that he would not give them heavy armor. But this was also good. If there was any heavy work later, he could let these guys do it. After thinking about it, he pretended to be reluctant. You guys can't stay. This is confidential and can't be seen by outsiders. No, we have to stay. Yes, this is the biggest concession we can make. The three of them argued until their faces were red. They were unwilling to back down. Zhang Feng saw that they were so determined and wanted to laugh. Since they wanted to stay, they could do hard work for Lao Tzu. He coughed lightly and said with a serious face, since you guys want to stay, you can help us later. Don't be lazy. No problem. Cheng Chimo waved his hand, indicating that there was no problem. Then he ran to Ma Zhou. Xiaoma, what do you need me to help with? Seeing that Cheng Chimo had gone to help, Zhang Sunchong and Zhang Sunchong did not want to stay any longer, so they quickly went to help. Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun were a little confused. They were doing a good job. Why would they need help? They looked to their mentor for help. Zhang Feng waved his hand and smiled. Tainyo, you guys go up? Actually, they were already prepared just now. It was almost the same as before. They just tied up the seal a little tighter. This experiment was to see what the problem was with their own eyes. Originally, he was prepared to go up. Since these three guys were here, he naturally had to go up and sacrifice himself for science. However, Cheng Chimo obviously did not think so. He thought that he was just going to help. He did not expect to go up. This time he was furious. He stepped back. Fengzi, are you trying to kill me? Don't you know how dangerous this thing is? Didn't you say you wanted to help? Zhang Feng revealed a malicious smile, then glanced at Zhang Sun, Chong, and the others. Besides, you're not the only one going up. There are these two guys as well. And us. Zhang Sun and Du Go stared at each other. They still remembered the scene outside Chang'an City. That was an incomparably miserable time, falling from the sky. They did not want to experience that feeling a second time. Therefore, he hurriedly waved his hand. Fengzi, we're not going. You know that our backs haven't recovered yet. You're sending us to our deaths. Don't worry. Zhang Feng smiled. I've improved the hot air balloon this time. There won't be any problems. If there really is a problem, I'll be waiting for you down there. Zhang Sun frowned in disbelief. Moreover, Feng Zi's smile did not seem to have any good intentions. He had just been thrown to the ground, and the shadow in his heart had not yet passed. How could he dare to go up again? He immediately refused. No, I'm not going. Zhang Feng's face darkened. Then he glanced at Cheng Chimo and the others. You're not going either? Cheng Chimo smiled awkwardly. He did not want to go, but he did not want to give Feng Zi face. So he said, Fengzi, it's not that we don't want to go, but this thing of yours is too dangerous. Enough. Zhang Feng waved his hand and interrupted Cheng Chimo. He was a little dissatisfied. You guys, when you came to me to ask for benefits, each one of you said nice things. Now that I'm letting you go, you're dragging me down. What, you don't want heavy armor and light cavalry? Heavy armor? Cheng Chimo instantly became spirited. But when he looked at the hot air balloon, he could not help but feel afraid. However, heavy armor and falling once were more important? Obviously heavy armor. After thinking for a while, he made up his mind. However, there was still some concern in his heart. He could not help but ask, Fengzi, is this thing really not dangerous? Seeing that Cheng Chimo seemed to have changed his mind, Zhang Feng put on a smile. Of course it's not a problem. Do you think I'm a vegetarian? Last time was just an accident. Besides, didn't the hot air balloon make a round trip last time? This time we'll experiment in this field. We'll be back in a few minutes. What are you worried about? Cheng Chimo's eyes turned. Seeing that Feng Zi's words made sense, he nodded and agreed. Seeing that he had convinced one, Zhang Feng turned his gaze to Zhang Sunchong and Du Go. De Bing Gu Zong. Ah. The two seemed to have been awakened and hurriedly responded. In fact, they were just discussing whether or not to board Feng Zi's pirate ship. Halfway through the discussion, they were awakened by Sha Kai's sudden appearance. At this time, the two of them were still a little flustered. They subconsciously asked, What's wrong? Zhang Feng did not care so much. He just smiled. How about the two of you? Are you going to board my pirate ship? No, are you going to board the hot air balloon? The two of them looked at each other and were a little flustered. After communicating with their eyes, they still could not come to a conclusion. Then they looked at Cheng Chimo. Chapter 1936. Cheng Chimo glanced back and the two instantly understood. Zhang Sun looked at Zhang Feng. Okay, let's go. Zhang Feng smiled. In fact, he had already guessed this result, so he said, okay, you guys go up now. I promise you won't be in danger. In fact, he had his reasons for saying this. The previous incident could only be considered an accident, but this time was different. The seal had been reinforced and it would only be tested for a while. That was why he dared to let the three of them go up. Otherwise he wouldn't dare even if he had 10 guts. However, Cheng Chimo and the other two didn't think so. They were still immersed in the pain of the previous injury, but they had no choice but to agree to Feng Zi's request. They could only reluctantly board the hot air balloon. Zhang Feng was overjoyed. He quickly called out to Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun. Get ready to take off. When the two heard this, they put the scissors on the hemp rope connected to the bricks, ready to cut at any time. Cheng Chimo and the other two on the hot air balloon didn't feel good. They held the basket with their hands and their faces were filled with despair. They thought that they had just been thrown last time, and now they were going to be thrown again. Why was their life so bitter? However, it was not up to them to decide. Since they had boarded the pirate ship, there was no reason to get off. With a snap, the hemp rope was cut, and the hot air balloon slowly floated up. At first there was nothing. It was still very stable and it felt the same as before. However, as it got higher and higher, it started to sway. This scared the three of them quite a bit and they shouted in the basket. Feng Zi, King hurt me again. Help, I don't want to die. They curled up together and cried for their parents. Zhang Feng on the ground put his hands on his hips and raised his head, as if all this had nothing to do with him. In fact, he had been listening carefully. After all, they had just taken off. They didn't fly high, but the sound was very loud. It wasn't that he wasn't worried about Cheng Chimo and the others. On the contrary, he was very relieved. This time, the hot air balloon had been reinforced, and its stability was much better than before. Moreover, it was only flying for a few hours and there was no danger at all. On the contrary, these guys kept crying and shouting and it was annoying. Just as he was thinking about it, the crying gradually quieted down. Zhang Feng glanced at the hot air balloon and realized that it had drifted away. He turned his head and glanced at Ma Zhou and the others. Let's go. Let's go and take a look. On the other hand, Cheng Chimo and the others felt that the hot air balloon was swaying for a while and they almost fell off. But now they were fine. They looked at each other and let go of their hands. They leaned over the basket and looked at it. The fear in their hearts lessened. Look over there, that's Shao Mountain. That's Chang'an City. They slowly let go of themselves as if they had discovered a new world. After watching for a while, the hot air balloon made a sizzling sound and began to descend. The descent this time was a little different from the previous time. Last time there was a sudden leak, but this time it was much slower, as if it was blowing air. If one did not listen carefully, they would not be able to tell the difference. The three of them were still sitting in the basket stupidly. It was only when they saw that the ground was getting closer and closer that they came to their senses. Why did it drop? Yeah, why are we almost at the surface? Didn't Feng Zi say that it would take a few incense sticks to burn? As they spoke, the hot air balloon had already descended to the ground. It landed steadily without any undulations. They quickly got down from the basket and surrounded the hot air balloon to look at it curiously. But at this moment, Zhang Feng came over with Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun. Feng Zi, why did we come down so quickly? Cheng Chimo looked at Zhang Feng with a puzzled face. Zhang Feng glanced at the hot air balloon and smiled. What? You want to continue playing in the sky? Cheng Chimo waved his hand. Although the hot air balloon gave him a good experience, who would dare to joke with their lives? He hurriedly said, No, I'm just curious. Didn't you say that it would take a few incense sticks to burn? Why did you come down so quickly? Is there a problem? Zhang Sunchong and Du Go also looked at Zhang Feng curiously. However, Zhang Feng didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked around the hot air balloon a few times and finally checked the seal. He revealed an expression of sudden realization and looked at everyone. Actually, I didn't know before, but now I know. After saying that, he looked at Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun and said with a serious face, Remember, don't use hemp rope to seal the balloon next time. The reason why it fell too quickly this time was because there was too little Qi Chong. Also, the gap in the hemp rope was too big. If you use hemp rope next time, it will definitely be the same as this time. Don't use hemp rope? Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun were a little confused. If they didn't use hemp rope, what would they use? They wanted to ask, but when they thought that their teacher might have other arrangements, they quickly wrote it down in their notebook and said in unison, "Yes, teacher." Zhang Feng nodded and then looked at Cheng Chumo and the others. He asked with a serious face, "Did you feel anything unusual when you were up there? This is very serious. In the future it may be related to human lives. Think carefully before you speak." Chapter 1937. He knew that these guys were usually sloppy. He purposely made things sound more serious to prevent them from spouting nonsense and to let them know the severity of the situation. Zhang Sunchong was smart and immediately understood Zhang Feng's meaning. After thinking for a while he said, "When we were rising we shook violently. I don't know if that counts. There was nothing else after that." After that he looked at Cheng Chumo and Dugo. Seeing that they had nothing to add, he nodded and said, "That's all." Zhang Feng frowned and was puzzled. Why did it tremble? Wasn't it fine normally? Why was there a problem now? He walked around the hot air balloon a few times and then checked the parts one by one. When he checked the iron wire, he realized that the iron wire was not tied tightly enough. He thought to himself that these guys were really lucky. They were fine. However, this also showed that Ma Zhou and the rest were not careful. It seemed that he had to be more careful next time. Otherwise someone might really die. As he thought about it, he glanced at everyone and finally fixed his eyes on Ma Zhou and the rest. "This is your mistake. Don't do it again. You have to check all the equipment properly. Otherwise someone might die." Ma Zhou and the rest saw it and quickly nodded. "Yes, teacher." Zhang Feng nodded and said, "Go and prepare some candles and some thin copper wire. Remember, it must be thinner than the iron wire this time. Come and find me when you are ready." Ma Zhou and the rest were puzzled. Why did their teacher need candles? They could not use them. However, since their teacher had given them instructions, he might have other intentions. They nodded and turned to leave. Cheng Chumo and the rest were idlers. Seeing that they had nothing to do, they found a place to sit around a fire to warm themselves. Zhang Feng saw the commotion and came over. He cupped his hands and felt extremely warm. After a while, Ma Zhou and the rest came back with the items. "Teacher, we have the items back. What do we do now?" Hao Chujun put the items on the ground and asked seriously. Zhang Feng glanced at it and finally fixed his eyes on the candle. "Light the candle first, then drip the wax on the seal." "Drip on the seal?" Hao Chujun stared blankly at Ma Zhou. He seemed to understand a little. There was a history of using wax to seal envelopes in the military. The wax was airtight. Once it dripped onto the envelope, it would be easy to tell if it had been tampered with. Even now, the military still uses this method to seal envelopes. Could it be that esteemed teacher wanted to use wax to isolate the airflow? He thought for a moment and asked, "Teacher, are you planning to use wax to isolate the airflow?" "Not bad." Zhang Feng did not hesitate and said directly, "Since you can see it, then I will tell you. Wax water has a very good airflow isolation property, and it can also isolate water flow. It is very important in the experiment, but it is very afraid of high temperature. Once it is exposed to high temperature, it will melt. This is the reason why I used wax water this time." Both of them nodded. They could basically understand everything their teacher said. Zhang Feng smiled and glanced at the hot air balloon. "Since you understand, then let's start the experiment. Now that there is still air in the hot air balloon, drip the wax on it." Both of them nodded and lit the candle with a match and dripped the wax on the seal. At first, due to the characteristics of the silk, the hot air balloon shrank slightly. However, they got used to it quickly. After a while, the entire seal was filled with wax. Ma Zhou looked at Zhang Feng and said seriously, "Teacher, the wax has been dripped. There should be no problem." Zhang Feng nodded and did not reply. Instead, he looked at Cheng Chumo and the rest who were warming themselves by the fire. "Tainyo de Bing Guchong, get up and work." Cheng Chumo and the rest turned around and glanced at him. Their faces were a little ugly. To be honest, they did not want to fly anymore. When this thing first came out, everyone felt that it was a novelty. Everyone wanted to go up and try it. This was understandable. However, after the fall last time, there was a shadow in their hearts. It would take some time before it could be erased. Today they were asked to go up again. There was already a shadow in their hearts. Moreover, when the cold wind blew, they were as cold as dogs. How could they stand it? Hence Cheng Chumo spoke. He looked at Zhang Feng with a pleading face. "Fengzi, didn't we just go up? Can't you find someone else to mess with? For example, your two precious disciples?" "Yes, Fengzi." Zhang Sun was also a little unhappy. He had almost frozen to death in the sky. It was not easy for him to come down and warm himself by the fire. Now he had to go up again. How could he? He frowned. It's so cold up there. We finally came down to warm ourselves. Don't you know how to be considerate? Why don't you let those two guys go up instead? As he said that, he pointed at Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun. Du Go also acted according to the situation. He pointed at the two as if he wanted them to go up. Chapter 1938. Hao Chujun and the other two were at a loss as to what to do. They looked at Zhang Feng and were about to say something when Zhang Feng waved his hand to stop them. He smiled at Qing Chumo and the others and said, Iron Bull, I know you feel cold in the sky, but this is for science and for the Tang Empire. You have to sacrifice once. As for Ma Zhou and the others, they cannot go to the sky. Why can't they go to the sky? Are you trying to trick us? Du Go was a little unconvinced. Do you think they can go to the sky with their physiques? Zhang Feng snorted and said angrily, besides, if they go to the sky, who will record the data underground? You. Everyone looked at each other. Although they didn't know what data was, Feng Zi said it so confidently. It should be something very important. They couldn't say much. It was just that, they were more or less repulsed by the idea of going to the sky. They had just been thrown down last time. No one was willing to go there again. Cheng Chumo said embarrassedly, Feng Zi, it's not that we don't want to go to the sky, but it's a little too cold. Can you relax a little? Or we can go find some people. He had already thought about it. As long as Feng Zi agreed, he would go outside and find some irrelevant people. At most he would pay some money. However, Zhang Feng obviously didn't think so. He frowned. He hated these guys' excuses the most. He waved his hand and said, No, you have been there before. I don't feel at ease letting others go. At most, I'll let you take some things to keep warm. Is that okay? Qing Chumo looked at Zhang Sun and the other two. Seeing that he couldn't refuse, he said, Well, you have to prepare more. Zhang Feng nodded and then looked at Ma Zhou and the others. You go and prepare some things to keep warm. Try to hurry. Ma Zhou and the others didn't hesitate. They turned and ran away. After a while they came back with all kinds of quilts and cotton-padded clothes. Zhang Feng casually glanced at it and then passed it to Qing Chumo and the others. Here, the quilt and cotton-padded clothes are all yours. Put them on and go up. Qing Chumo and the others reluctantly took the cotton-padded clothes and slowly boarded the hot air balloon. After everything was ready, Zhang Feng looked at Ma Zhou and the others. Untie the ropes and take off. Ma Zhou nodded and quickly untied the hemp rope. The hot air balloon slowly rose at a speed visible to the naked eye. This time it was much more stable, unlike the last time when it kept rising. Qing Chumo and the others seemed to be used to all this. They didn't roar and just sat in the basket in a daze. The hot air balloon flew higher and higher, slowly passing through the clouds. After about an incense stick's worth of time, it finally stopped in the air. Qing Chumo and the others sat in the hot air balloon, snuggling with each other. Their eyes were unfocused, as if everything outside had nothing to do with them. On the ground, Zhang Feng raised his head and glanced at Ma Zhou and the others from time to time. He said, Remember, after using wax water to seal the hot air balloon, it's obviously much more stable. There are no more swings and there shouldn't be any air leakage. The two of them replied with an "oh," and started writing in their books. This experiment was very important to them. Not only did it solve the problem of air leakage, but it also stabilized a lot. It was undoubtedly a huge improvement. However, they soon thought of other problems. Just now, Tainyo and the others came down because of air leakage. Now that this problem was solved by their benefactor, how were they going to come down now? The air in the hot air balloon was sealed. As long as the air was not exhausted, it would be very difficult for them to come down. Thinking about this, Hao Chujun quickly asked, Benefactor, wait, how are Brother Tainyo and the others coming down? How are they going to come down? Zhang Feng frowned. He suspected that this guy had become stupid from studying. Didn't he come down just now? Why couldn't he come down now? He replied in a bad mood, They'll come down now the same way they came down just now. Are you stupid? Benefactor, have you forgotten? Hao Chujun's expression changed and he quickly reminded, Brother Tainyo and the others came down just now because of air leakage. Now that you've solved this problem, how are they going to come down now? Zhang Feng was startled. Hao Chujun's words reminded him. That's right, I've already blocked this flaw. As long as the air inside was not exhausted, it would be very difficult for them to come down unless... He glanced at the two of them and quickly said, Did you prepare sandbags or other heavy objects on the hot air balloon just now? The rise and fall of a hot air balloon was related to the temperature inside the balloon. When the temperature inside the balloon was high, the weight of the balloon would decrease. When the buoyancy was lower, the balloon would rise. When the temperature of the air inside the balloon dropped, the buoyancy produced by the balloon would be lower than the weight of the balloon, and the balloon would begin to fall. However, this method could not be used in the hot air balloon that was currently being developed. Therefore, they could only rely on heavy objects such as sandbags and other things. Because the direction of the wind at different altitudes was different, the airflow produced was also different. If they wanted to rise, they would have to throw down the heavy objects on the hot air balloon. Following the direction of the airflow, they would change their direction and altitude. Chapter 1939. If they wanted to descend, the weight of the hot air balloon couldn't be dropped. Instead, it had to be heavier. Of course, it couldn't be heavier in the air, so they could only rely on the airflow and wind direction to descend. The hot air balloon didn't have a rudder, so it had to move with the wind. This was inevitable and unchangeable. Just now, the iron bulls were able to descend safely because the hot air balloon had a slight air leak. It wasn't serious, so they could descend slowly. Now it was different. The hot air balloon's mouth was sealed, and there was no weight inside to suppress it. Who knew when they could descend? Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun were well aware of this, because they had done everything with their own hands. Now, facing their teacher's question, they were a little flustered, but they couldn't not answer. Hao Chujun could only say submissively, "Teacher, I was so focused on sealing the mouth that I forgot to put the sandbag. Please punish me." Zhang Feng frowned and thought to himself, "This is bad. Without the sandbag to suppress it, the hot air balloon would definitely rise higher and higher." He couldn't care less about what he was thinking and suddenly looked up. As expected, the hot air balloon could now be seen as a shadow. What should they do? The iron bulls were brought up to the sky by the hot air balloon, and now the mouth was sealed. When would they come down? Ma Zhou seemed to have noticed something and quickly asked, "Teacher, what should we do now? Will Brother Iron Bull and the others be in danger?" Zhang Feng glanced at the sky and sighed, "There's no danger. After all, the hot air balloon has been perfected. I just don't know when these guys will come down." Hearing this, Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun looked at each other and realized their mistake. They quickly lowered their heads and admitted their mistake. "Please forgive us, teacher. This time it's all our fault." Zhang Feng waved his hand and didn't mind. "It's not your fault. You were just following orders. The main thing is that I didn't explain it clearly to you." With that, he sighed and walked towards the fire. "You don't have to blame yourselves. Come and sit. Iron Bull and the others won't be in danger. They should be able to come down even when it's dark. Let's sit here and wait for them." Hao Chujun didn't hear any reproach in his teacher's words, so he casually found a seat and sat down. He glanced at the dusky sun in the sky and said, "Teacher, it's already noon. Brother Tainyo should be able to come down by now, right?" Zhang Feng looked up and said uncertainly, "I don't know. He should be able to come down, right?" As soon as he finished speaking, he felt a gurgling sound coming from his stomach, followed by a feeling of hunger. Therefore he looked at Ma Zhou and Ma Li. "Are you guys hungry? Let's go find something to eat." Ma Zhou rubbed his belly and said with a silly smile, "If Master didn't mention it, I wouldn't have felt it. I'm just a little hungry. I'll go and find something." After saying that, he pulled Hao Chujun and ran away. Not long after, the two of them ran back with all kinds of ingredients. There were fish, sweet potatoes and other things. Ma Zhou grinned at Zhang Feng. "Master, this sweet potato is something I've been looking for a long time. I used to roast it a lot. There's also this fish." Zhang Feng looked at the sweet potato in Ma Zhou's hand, and the hunger in his stomach couldn't help but rise. He swallowed his saliva and said, "Don't talk nonsense. Let's get started." Ma Zhou chuckled and his hands were already moving. Hao Chujun was also helping at the side. The two of them roasted the sweet potato, and the other roasted the fresh fish. Not long after, a melodious fragrance floated out, causing Zhang Feng to swallow his saliva. Time seemed to pass very quickly in winter. The sun that was hanging above their heads just now had already begun to set in the west. Zhang Feng ate the roasted sweet potato in his hand and glanced at the sky. At this glance, he seemed to have discovered something. He suddenly stood up and said in surprise, "Where did Tainyo and the others go?" Ma Zhou and Ma Li also hurriedly stood up and carefully scanned the sky. As expected, they didn't find any trace of Tainyo and the others. He hurriedly asked, "Master, what should we do now? Has Brother Tainyo disappeared?" Zhang Feng was just about to say, "Immediately chase after them," when the tip of his nose was unwillingly attracted by a fragrance. He smelled the fragrance and looked over. He saw that the roasted fish on the fire was already crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. The fish was already cooked. It would be a waste if he didn't eat it. Moreover, Tainyo and the others were in the sky. They shouldn't be in any danger, right? After thinking about it, he suppressed the evil thoughts in his heart. He turned around and sat down. He looked at Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun and said, "Come, let's eat the fish first." Eat fish? Hao Chujun and Ma Zhou were stunned. Now that he was eating fish, he wasn't going to look for Brother Tainyo and the others? What was their master thinking? Getting rid of the donkey after it had left the millstone? Not admitting it after putting on his pants? No, they couldn't let their master go down the wrong path. Ma Zhou hurriedly said, "Master, finding Brother Tainyo is more important now. We should—" Halfway through his words, he didn't continue because he knew that his teacher definitely understood what he meant. Actually, his guess wasn't wrong. Zhang Feng indeed understood. However, how could delicious food be more important than brothers? Pay, only for now. Chapter 1940. He coughed lightly and said with a straight face, "Think about it, we haven't eaten since this morning. How can we find Tainyo if we don't have any strength? So the most important thing now is to replenish our energy. Hurry up and eat." With that, he picked up a piece of grilled fish and started eating. Hao Chujun and Zhou Zhuo looked at each other and didn't know how to answer. How could eating fish have anything to do with finding people? But what their teacher said made sense. There didn't seem to be anything wrong. If they didn't eat their fill, what would they do if their legs went weak? If Iron Bull's brothers were in danger, they wouldn't be able to save them. The two nodded and silently agreed with this answer in their hearts. So they picked up the remaining grilled fish and started eating. After eating and drinking, Zhang Feng burped and looked at Ma Zhou and Zhou Zhuo. "Are you full? Let's go find Iron Bull and the others." Ma Zhou quickly put down the fish bone and smacked his lips. Okay. Actually, when he was eating just now, he felt a little guilty. Iron Bull's brothers were missing, but he was eating and drinking here. He really shouldn't have. However, the smell of the grilled fish made him give up on the distracting thoughts in his heart. How could food be more important than brothers? And they were the kind of brothers that smelled so good. Hao Chujun was different from him. He ate and drank as he pleased. Since his teacher was eating, what did it matter if he ate? And since his teacher had spoken, he couldn't let him down. He wiped the dust off the corner of his mouth and grinned. "Teacher, let's go." Zhang Feng nodded and stood up to look around. Then he said, "We'll split into 3 directions. I'll go east, Ma Zhou west, Hao Chujun north. If you find him, shout a few times and I should be able to hear you. If you don't find him, go south. If you don't find him in the south, come to the east. There must be one in the 4 directions." Ma Zhou and Zhou Zhuo nodded and turned to walk in different directions. Zhang Feng didn't hesitate and walked straight to the east. There were students shoveling snow on the field every day, so the snow last night wasn't very deep. However, there was still a sound of footsteps on it, like a movement. Obviously, he was not in the mood to appreciate the movement. When he thought of Iron Bull and the others, he could not help but quicken his pace. After walking for about a quarter of an hour, they vaguely saw something that looked like a tent in front of them. Not only that, there were also some flames. How could the research institute have something like this? And why does this thing look like a hot air balloon? Puzzled, he couldn't help but quicken his pace. As he walked closer, he saw 3 people sitting beside the fire. They were Cheng Chumo, Zhang Sun Chong and Du Go. This tent-like thing was also a hot air balloon. However, this hot air balloon seemed to be deflated at this moment, dispirited and listless. Zhang Feng was puzzled. Wasn't it sealed with wax? How could he be discouraged? He couldn't help but ask, "Iron Bull, what's the matter with this hot air balloon?" When Cheng Chumo heard this, he rolled his eyes at Zhang Feng. "You still have the nerve to say that. If we weren't smart enough to poke a hole in the hot air balloon, we would probably still be in the sky." What? Zhang Feng's eyes widened. Poked a hole in the hot air balloon? These guys actually poked a hole in the hot air balloon? Didn't they know how difficult it was to make this thing? They actually poked a hole in it? The veins on his head bulged. Just as he was about to curse, he suddenly thought of something. These guys didn't want to go up in the first place. If he scolded them now, what if they still didn't want to go up? He still had to rely on these guys for the experiment later. After thinking about it, he suppressed the anger in his heart and said with a gloomy face, "Can't you wait for the hot air balloon to descend on its own? Do you have to expose it? Aren't you afraid of dying?" Cheng Chumo raised his head and felt that the hair on his nose could be seen. "When will it descend on its own? I'm afraid we'll have to go tomorrow morning." After saying that, he seemed a little dissatisfied. Of course we're afraid of dying, but we're even more afraid of not being able to descend from the sky. That's why we poked the hot air balloon. Isn't it just some silk? At worst I'll give you some more. Besides, we gave you so much last time. You probably haven't used it all, right? Yes. Zhang Sun rushed over and said, "Feng Zi, it's just some silk. Do you have to go so far?" Zhang Feng's face turned slightly red. He really hadn't used up all the silk from last time. At worst he could just change it. He didn't argue and waved his hand. Forget it, forget it. Let's not talk about this for now. How did it feel up there? Ching Chimo's head twitched. Obviously he didn't want to answer. Seeing this, Dugo quickly smiled and said, Fengzi, the effect up there was quite good. It was much more stable, but there was no way to control the direction. You saw it yourself when you were down there. Zhang Feng nodded. Actually, he had already noticed what Dugo said. There was no way to control the direction because of the weight. There was no heavy object on top of the hot air balloon to suppress it. As long as there were heavy objects like sandbags, he believed that such a situation could be avoided. Chapter 1941. He knew the reason, but how could he coax these people to go up? He glanced at the three people who were sulking and fell into deep thought. But at this moment, Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun ran over. Teacher, teacher, Hao Chujun shouted as he ran. The sudden shout interrupted Zhang Feng's thoughts. He looked up and said angrily, What's wrong? Ma Zhou gasped and said, Teacher, what should we do if the hot air balloon breaks? Zhang Feng glanced at the deflated hot air balloon and replied, You should have some leftover silk, right? Bring it over and reassemble it. Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun nodded, turned around and ran away. Cheng Chimo saw this and quickly waved his hand. Fengzi, we won't go up later. He knew that Ma Zhou was going to get the silk now to remake the hot air balloon. Once it was done, it would be better for them to go up. Now was the time to say it in advance, lest they become lab rats later. Zhang Feng naturally knew what this guy was thinking, so he had to persuade him. Tainyo, think about it. You're sacrificing yourself for science. If you succeed, the people of the Tang Dynasty will remember you, and your Qin family will be proud in the future. Ching Chimo was stunned. Why did this sound so strange? It sounded like he was going to die? Sacrifice himself? The people of the Tang Dynasty would remember him? Was this a trap waiting for him to fall into? The more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. He quickly refused. No, I don't want the people of the Tang Dynasty to remember me. Lao Tzu hasn't married yet. I don't want to die yet. Zhang Sun also seemed to understand something and quickly interjected, Yes, you want to experiment on us. We're not stupid. Didn't we already experiment just now? Dugo was also about to say something, but unexpectedly, Zhang Feng was one step ahead of him. He said, That was then and this is now. Just now, I admit that I made a mistake. I didn't put the sandbag up, but it's different now. I've already prepared the sandbag. As long as you guys don't poke the hot air balloon again, I guarantee that nothing will happen. Dugo shook his head like a rattle drum, his face full of reluctance. Although I've done this a few times, it's still a little dangerous. I don't want to throw my life away. After saying that, he looked at Cheng Chimo and Li Yunhong. Don't you think so? It was as if Cheng Chimo and Lu Zilong had discussed this beforehand. They nodded in unison and even looked at Zhang Feng with disdain. This made Zhang Feng very worried. If these fellows weren't willing to go up, then who else could he find to experiment with? Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun had to record the data below. The students had no experience at all. If they went up, they might wet their pants. At the end of the day, it was still these guys. His brows furrowed and his face darkened. Iron Bull, don't you want heavy armor and light cavalry? Ching Chimo was startled. Heavy armor was indeed something he had dreamed of. As the eldest son of the Cheng family, he had always been called a wastrel. This made him very uncomfortable. He had always wanted to get rid of this unpleasant title. His father had often beaten him because of this. However, how could it be so easy? When he met Fengzi, he knew that it was possible. However, this family wanted him to sit in a hot air balloon. This was something that could take his life. Compared to his life, heavy armor was a little less important. He narrowed his eyes and seemed to have made up his mind. I don't want it. How can heavy armor be more important than my life? When he said this, Zhang Sun and Dugo both widened their eyes, as if they didn't know this guy in front of them. They all knew that Iron Bull viewed heavy armor as more important than his life. Now, he actually said something like this? It was hard to believe. Did this guy really not want heavy armor? They looked at Iron Bull in disbelief, but they couldn't see anything. And this guy was really good at lying. This was the conclusion that the two of them had for Iron Bull. Because they didn't believe that Iron Bull would give up on heavy armor, the only possibility now was that this guy was lying. Then could they give it a try? With that thought in mind, Zhang Sun also said, I don't want the light cavalry either. Zhang Feng was stunned. He thought that Iron Bull might have said this on impulse, but he never thought that Zhang Sun would say the same thing. One had to know that this guy loved to urge others from behind. This time it was completely different. He didn't urge others, but he fell into it himself. Zhang Feng had nothing to say. He could only admit defeat. Now that these two guys didn't want heavy armor and light cavalry, wouldn't he have no way to do anything to them? How could he coax them into the hot air balloon? If he went up, would he be able to do it? In fact, it wasn't a bad thing for him to go up. The hot air balloon was basically not dangerous now. It was just a matter of how it rose and fell. Moreover, he could understand the hot air balloon more directly if he went up. However, if he went up, would these guys also come up? He probed with some uncertainty. If I go up, will you guys come up? You want to go? Cheng Chumo frowned, then looked at Zhang Sun and Du Go. They seemed to be exchanging glances. Chapter 1942. If Feng Zi went up, then there would be no danger. To be honest, they were not willing to go up because they were worried about the danger. Now that Zhang Feng went up, these worries were basically eliminated. Zhang Sun understood in his heart and revealed a malicious smile. If we go up, then what about the heavy armor and light cavalry that you promised before? These words reminded Cheng Chumo. He looked at Zhang Feng and quickly said, Yes, do you still honor your promise? Zhang Feng smiled, thinking that these guys really knew how to take advantage of the situation. Just now they said that they would not go up, but now that they heard that he was going up, they immediately thickened their faces and came. However, this was understandable. After all, he had promised these guys. He could only say, honor the promise, okay? Are you going up or not? Yes, I will fight with whoever doesn't go up. Cheng Chumo glared and raised his right hand as he looked at Zhang Sun and Ma Tao. It was as if these words were meant for them to hear. In fact, Zhang Sun was extremely happy. If Feng Zi went up, then there would be no danger. He could also get a light cavalry for free. Only a fool would not go up. He quickly raised his right hand and imitated Cheng Chumo. I'm going to. Whoever doesn't go up, I will deal with him right now. Now only Du Go was left. He was unwilling to go up. These heavy armor and light cavalry had nothing to do with him. Why should he go up? Although it should be dangerous up there, it was cold. Just thinking about the cold wind was enough. However, when he saw Cheng Chumo and Zhang Sun look like they wanted to eat him up, he swallowed his words of refusal. He could only say submissively, then let's go. Zhang Feng nodded in satisfaction. Good Lao Tzu did not misjudge you. As soon as he finished speaking, Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun both staggered back. They were holding silk and many sandbags. They were so tired that they were panting. Hao Chujun quickly stepped forward and threw down the sandbags in his hands. He panted heavily. Teacher, I got the things back. Zhang Feng nodded and glanced at the materials. Start preparing now. You must be quick. After saying that, he glanced at the setting sun. Time passed very quickly in winter and it was almost Yushur hour. He estimated that it would be dark soon, so he had to speed up. Thus he looked at Cheng Chumo and the others. You guys work together and try to finish it before dark. Cheng Chumo and the others didn't say anything and hurriedly went to help. In a short while the hot air balloon was remade. Ma Zhou looked at Zhang Feng and said seriously, Teacher, the hot air balloon has been prepared. This time I have checked it 3 times. There is absolutely no problem. Yes. Zhang Feng nodded. Then he pointed at the sandbags on the ground. Put the sandbags there. Put as many as you can. If there are any other heavy objects, you can put them there too. Ma Zhou and the others nodded and put all the sandbags up one by one. Only then did they stop. Zhang Feng saw everything clearly from the side. Seeing that there was no problem, he took the lead and walked up the hot air balloon. Then he looked at Cheng Chumo and the others. You guys come up too. Cheng Chumo and the others saw that there was no problem and that Feng Zi had also gone up. Only then did they slowly step onto the hot air balloon. Zhang Feng glanced at Ma Zhou and said, Untie the hemp rope. Ma Zhou nodded and immediately untied the hemp rope. Soon the hot air balloon began to slowly float up. It was unknown whether it was because of the sandbags or other reasons, but the rise this time was particularly slow. Cheng Chumo and the others no longer had the fear from before. It was as if with Feng Zi as a protective talisman by their side, there was nothing to be afraid of. They each leaned on the edge of the basket and admired the beautiful underground scenery. Zhang Feng was not so leisurely. This time he went up to record the approximate deviation of the hot air balloon's rise and fall due to the airflow, so as to avoid accidentally drifting far away next time. The hot air balloon rose higher and higher, slowly passing through the clouds in the sky. After a quarter of an hour, it stopped in the air with very little shaking. Zhang Feng stood up and glanced down. The beautiful scenery was in his eyes, but he still did not stop writing. Iron Bull, how far do you think we are from the ground now? He turned to look at Cheng Chumo and the others. In fact, he had a rough idea in his heart, but he was still a little uncertain, so he wanted to ask these guys. Cheng Chimo raised his head and was a little puzzled. Are you full? Why do you care about this? Zhang Feng did not like to hear this. The height of the hot air balloon was related to the gas inside. If there was more gas, it would be easier to rise higher, and if there was less gas, it would be easier to fall faster. This guy had such an attitude towards such an important matter? And most importantly, the hot air balloon could be used in the military and agriculture in the future. Height was very important. However, it was a little difficult to explain to these guys, and he did not intend to do so. He waved his hand and said with a serious face, "Don't worry about what I'm doing. First, how far are we from the ground?" Cheng Chimo curled his lips and was a little impatient, but he still glanced at the ground and said slowly, "This should be 2 miles. After that, he looked at Zhang Sun and raised his eyebrows. "Bug, what do you think?" Chapter 1943. Zhang Sun obviously did not have much interest in this question, but seeing that everyone was discussing, he could only glance at it and reply, 2 miles it is. "I don't think so." Du Go crossed his arms in front of his chest. He seemed to have a different opinion. He also looked down and curled his lips. "I think 1.5 miles. Zhang Feng nodded and did not refute. He recorded everything everyone said in his notebook. These were all important data. Even if they were 1.5 miles above the ground, the hot air balloon had stopped moving in the air. This meant that the hydrogen this time could only support the weight of 4 people, and it was 1.5 miles above the ground. If they wanted to fly higher next time, they would need to add more hydrogen, at least more than this time. This way they could basically guarantee that they could fly higher than this time. This could be used in the military. On the other hand, if they wanted to fly lower, they could add less hydrogen, at least less than this time. That way they could fly lower than this time. This way they could use it for agriculture. After recording everything, Zhang Feng was just about to speak when a gust of cold wind blew. Feeling the chill, he quickly said, "Throw 2 sandbags down." Cheng Chimo and the others had made hot air balloons before, so they naturally knew what the sandbags were for. It was nothing more than to lighten the load and use the wind to change the direction of the balloon. Knowing this, each of them threw a sandbag down. As the weight of the hot air balloon decreased, the cold wind blew and its direction slowly began to change. Soon, the hot air balloon began to make a sharp turn and floated down. Zhang Feng sat in the basket, holding a pen in one hand and a notebook in the other, recording the wind direction and the speed of the hot air balloon's deviation. Cheng Chimo and the other 2 snuggled together. This time it was strange that they did not shout. Perhaps it was because they were curious. The 3 of them stared closely at Zhang Feng's notebook and were somewhat puzzled. Zhang Sun could not help but ask, "Feng Zi, the wind is so strong. What are you writing in that notebook of yours?" Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Zhang Sun Chong. "What do you know? If Lao Tzu didn't record and experiment again and again, how many times could you survive? I'm afraid there aren't any left." After that he ignored the 3 of them. However, his words made Zhang Sun Chong and the others feel uncomfortable. Did he really think that Lao Tzu was a lab rat? The last experiment? Resentment was resentment, but on second thought, this kid was still a responsible person. He even knew how to record it down and wouldn't do any useless experiments. With that thought, Du Go looked at Zhang Feng and asked, "Feng Zi, what are you recording? Take it out and let me have a look." Zhang Feng frowned. He put down the pen in his hand and glanced at the 3 of them. "You don't understand. It's useless even if I show you. If you have the time, why don't you see how far we are from the surface?" Du Go nodded and did not refute. He glanced down and said in surprise, "We're almost there. It's less than half a mile." As soon as he said that, Cheng Chimo and Zhang Sun Chong stood up and looked down. Sure enough, they were not far from the surface. They cheered, "We're here. We're almost there." Zhang Feng glanced at Cheng Chimo and the others. "We're here. What's there to be surprised about?" Cheng Chimo was deflated. He glared at Zhang Feng and did not say anything. He cheered with Zhang Sun Chong and the others. After about the time it took to smoke a cigarette, the hot air balloon swayed as if it had hit something. Zhang Feng quickly got up and glanced down. It turned out that they had reached the surface. He was about to ask Cheng Chimo and the others to get down. Unexpectedly, these fellows were even more enthusiastic than him. The hot air balloon had just touched the ground when these fellows had already jumped down. Zhang Feng shook his head and smiled. He slowly walked down from the hot air balloon. As soon as he came down, Ma Zhou ran over. He looked at Zhang Feng expectantly. "Teacher, how was it just now? Is there any important news?" Zhang Feng handed the book in his hand to Ma Zhou and said with a serious face, "Just now, we were about half a mile to 2 miles in the sky. This is related to the hydrogen you injected into the hot air balloon. Remember, if you want to fly higher next time, you have to inject more hydrogen and put less sandbags. If you want to fly lower, inject less hydrogen and put more sandbags. Understand? Ma Zhou handed the book in his hand to Hao Chujun and nodded. Understood, teacher. Hao Chujun also nodded, indicating that he understood. Zhang Feng glanced at the sun in the sky. Seeing that the sun had set and the surroundings were starting to fog, he looked at everyone. That's all for today. If there's anything else, we'll talk about it later. Cheng Chumo and the others finally breathed a sigh of relief. The experiment was finally over. There was no need to suffer. They kept cheering as if they were celebrating something. The corner of Zhang Feng's mouth twitched. He thought to himself, is it so torturous to sit in my hot air balloon? These fellows. With that thought, he turned around and prepared to leave. At this moment, Hao Chujun spoke. He said with some disappointment, Teacher, are you still coming tomorrow? I won't be coming tomorrow. Chapter 1944. Zhang Feng blurted out without thinking. There was no problem with the hot air balloons now. As long as they continued to produce them, they just had to keep up with the rest. However, Ma Zhou did not think so. His teacher had just returned and stayed for a short while. Why was he leaving again? Thus he tried to persuade him to stay. Teacher, the problem of the hot air balloons has not been solved yet. Are you not coming back? Zhang Feng smiled faintly as if he had seen through Ma Zhou's thoughts. There is no problem with the hot air balloons now. Continue to produce them according to what I said today. It will be of great use in the future. As for the future, I will come to see you often. Ma Zhou and Hao Chujun looked at each other. Seeing that the latter did not speak, he could only say, Yes, teacher. Zhang Feng nodded in satisfaction. Then he looked at Cheng Chumo. What about you guys? Go back to the Zhang mansion. I'm not going back. I want to follow you. Cheng Chumo immediately interrupted and said aggressively, If you leave, who will we ask for the heavy armor? He had already thought it through. He had made such a great contribution this time. If this kid did not give him the heavy armor, he would follow him all the time even if it meant eating. Obviously, Zhang Sunchong had the same idea. He frowned and said, That's right. Don't even think about running away. Unless you give it to us, we will follow you all the time. We will eat and drink your Zhang family's food. Du Gohe did not have such thoughts. However, these two guys had such an attitude. He felt that it was not good enough if he did not say anything. Thus, he curled his lips and said reluctantly, Yes, I will follow you too. Not for anything else but for Iron Bull and Buggy. As soon as he said this, two burning eyes looked over. It was Cheng Chumo and Zhang Sun. In fact, the two of them did not expect this guy to be so determined. Now, it seemed that he was really a good brother. However, Zhang Feng was bitter. He smiled bitterly. You guys are really sticky candy. I can't get rid of you even if I want to. Alright then, I am going to the academy. You guys can come if you want. After that, he looked up to the sky and sighed. He turned and walked toward the academy. Cheng Chumo and the others looked at each other and naturally followed closely behind. Now that things had come to this, they naturally could not let this kid go. Zhang Feng walked in front and glanced back from time to time. He found that these guys were really following him. He had a big headache and couldn't help but speed up trying to get rid of these annoying guys. However, how could Cheng Chumo and the others fall for this? Seeing Zhang Feng quicken his pace, he hurriedly chased after him. Zhang Feng returned to the academy in silence. Some students greeted him, but he was not in the mood. He hurried back to his residence and bolted the door, ignoring everyone. Cheng Chumo and the others hurried and finally arrived at the residence. They were panting heavily and without saying anything they went up and called out. Feng Zi, open the door. Don't think that you'll be fine if you hide inside. If you have the ability to make a promise, then you have the ability to give me something. Zhang Feng was irritated by the loud shouts. He lit up a cigarette and smoked silently. He thought to himself that this could not go on. It was better to go to the workshop tomorrow morning to find something for these guys to play with. Otherwise, it would not be good for them to keep pestering him. Just as he was thinking, the shouting outside grew louder. Zhang Feng could not stand it anymore. He threw away the cigarette butt in his hand and shouted at the door, Stop King quarreling. If there's anything we can talk about it tomorrow. After that, he turned over and got into bed angrily. He did not even take off his clothes. He stuffed the blanket over his head and pretended not to hear the voices outside. Outside the door, following Zhang Feng's shouting, Cheng Chumo waved his hand and signaled Zhang Sun and the others to shut up. Zhang Sun was also smart. He quickly stopped and looked at Cheng Chumo impatiently. Tainyo, what did Feng Zi just say? Did you hear it? Ching Chumo did not answer. He put his ear on the door as if he was listening for something. After a while, he looked at Zhang Sunchong and said seriously, Fengzi should be saying that he will give us the things tomorrow and asked us to find a place to sleep first. Zhang Sun frowned as if he did not believe it. Because he knew Fengzi well. How could this guy let go so easily? But he did not hear it clearly, so he looked at Dugo. Debing, did you hear what Fengzi said just now? Dugo raised his eyebrows and smiled as if he was the most reliable. I heard Fengzi say that if you guys continue to quarrel he would break your legs. That's all. Zhang Sun frowned again. According to Fengzi's personality, it was very likely that he would say something like that. But these two guys each said something different. Who should he listen to? He said with some doubt, Can you two be sure? What did Fengzi say? Cheng Chumo looked at Dugo and was puzzled. Could this guy be right? Actually, he was just guessing, so he was not sure. But no matter what Fengzi said, he would not leave. Chapter 1945. Thus he made up his mind. No matter what this bastard says, we have to give him the thing. We'll wait here today. Anyway, it's already dark and he can't go out. Tomorrow morning we'll ask him for the thing. What do you think? Zhang Sun looked at the dark sky and seemed to have made a decision. He nodded. That's right. It's already dark and we can't go down the mountain. We'll wait here for this kid and ask him for the thing tomorrow. Dugo felt that he had boarded a pirate ship, but it seemed like he couldn't get off now. He could only nod reluctantly. After making up their minds, the three of them didn't say much. They found an empty space near the door and sat down. Time passed by bit by bit. The fog started to rise and the air was moist, making people feel cold. They didn't know what was going on tonight. Perhaps the heavens were looking at these guys. It didn't snow, but layers of fog passed through, making people shiver from the cold. Ching Chumo and the other two also seemed to feel the cold. They hugged each other tightly to keep each other warm. However, it didn't seem to be of much use. They were still shivering and their lips were a little blue. They wanted to sleep, but the cold seeped into their bones, making it impossible for them to sleep. Cheng Chumo opened his blue lips and said with a trembling voice, Brothers, why don't we start a fire? Fire? Jiang Xuan's eyes lit up. It was so cold now. The only way was to start a fire. He blurted out, Let's go and find firewood. After saying that, the two of them supported each other and ran away. Dugo was a little slow on the uptake and hurriedly followed. The academy had basically been cleaned up, so it was difficult to find firewood. However, these guys had found some dried grass and branches from somewhere, and they were all green. After striking flint for a long time, they finally started a fire. They huddled together and cupped their hands. They felt waves of warmth and were satisfied. Finally, they snuggled together again. However, it was much better this time. There was no coldness. Soon, the three of them hugged each other and fell asleep. Just like that, the night passed. The next day, the sun slowly rose and the golden sunlight shone on their faces. Cheng Chumo was the first to open his eyes. He felt something strange in front of his chest. He glanced at it and found that it was Zhang Sun who put his hand on his chest. He quickly pushed it away and shouted, Insect, what the hell are you doing? With this roar, Zhang Sunchong was startled. He suddenly sat up and looked around. Who? Cheng Chumo looked at Zhang Sun angrily and slapped him. Mother***, it's me. Zhang Sun covered his face and looked at Cheng Chumo with an aggrieved expression. Iron Bull, why the F***ck did you hit me? Cheng Chumo was stunned. Could it be that this fellow had forgotten everything that had happened just now? He sighed and thought that the heavens were unfair. Then he looked at Zhang Sun and tried to comfort him. Insect, you were having a seizure. Lao Tzu hit you to wake you up. After saying that, he seemed to have thought of something and quickly said, Let's go and find Fengzi. Zhang Sun was still thinking about what had happened just now. Was he having a seizure? How was that possible? However, when he heard Fengzi, he immediately threw this matter to the back of his mind and said to Cheng Chumo, Iron Bull, wait for me. After saying that, he was about to leave when he found someone hugging his leg. He looked down and saw that it was Dugo. This guy's eyes were closed and he was still drooling. He was obviously still sleeping. Zhang Sun was furious. He raised his other leg and kicked him. You dog, wake up quickly. Lao Tzu and the others are going to do something important. You're still sleeping? Dugo's body curled up in pain and he instantly woke up. He said angrily, That dog kicked Lao Tzu. When Zhang Sun saw that Dugo was awake, he didn't care whether he was in pain or not. He grabbed him and ran towards Zhang Feng's door. Just as he reached the door, he saw Cheng Chumo knock the door open and rush in. Zhang Sunchong also hurriedly followed. When they reached the bed, they all stopped in their tracks. They saw that Zhang Feng's eyes were closed and he was snoring. It was obvious that he was still sleeping soundly. Cheng Chimo couldn't stand it. Lao Tzu was freezing outside and you were sleeping inside? Therefore he lifted the blanket and shouted, "Feng Zi, get up quickly." Zhang Sun didn't hesitate. He pulled Zhang Feng's arm and shook it. He shouted, "Feng Zi. Feng Zi." Du Go was still in pain, but when he saw Zhang Feng and heard the shout, he seemed to wake up a lot. Even the pain lessened. What? There was someone more pitiful than him. Zhang Feng was stimulated by the noise and finally couldn't stand it. He opened his eyes and stared at everyone. "Are you looking for death? You want to come in when Lao Tzu is sleeping?" Zhang Sun laughed and let go of Zhang Feng's right arm. "Feng Zi, we had no choice. It was too cold outside, so we came in to avoid the cold." "Yes, Feng Zi, to avoid the cold." Cheng Chimo smiled awkwardly and deliberately shivered. "You don't know how cold it was outside your door last night?" Chapter 1946. What? Zhang Feng's eyes widened in disbelief. "You guys stayed outside for the whole night? The weather was so cold these few days and these guys actually stayed outside for the whole night? Were they looking for death?" Cheng Chimo didn't think much of it and patted his chest. "It's just one night. With my physique there's naturally no problem, but De Bing is in trouble. Look, De Bing's legs are frozen." As he spoke, he pulled Du Go over and said with a smile, "Come, walk a few steps for Feng Zi, see if he's frozen." Du Go looked aggrieved and Cheng Chimo walked a few steps, and it looked like it was really the case. Zhang Feng looked at Du Go in confusion. How was this King frostbite? This was clearly from being beaten up. However, these guys said that they stayed outside for the whole night and even said it so seriously, it didn't look like it was fake. Moreover, these guys had some white frost on their heads and it didn't look like it was fake. Now he was convinced. These guys really didn't care about their lives for the heavy armor. Forget it, he'd better find something to send them off. Thinking about it, he glanced at everyone and said, all right, we'll go find it later, okay?" Cheng Chimo's face lit up and he hurriedly said, Okay, then don't be happy too early." Zhang Feng immediately interrupted and waved his hand. "The thing shouldn't be made yet, we can't be sure if we can find it." Now he had to give them a heads up or else these guys would definitely not let it go later. Sure enough, his words instantly made everyone's hearts turn cold, as if they were splashed with cold water. However, Cheng Chimo didn't seem to take it to heart and said casually, all right, what's with all this nonsense, we'll know when we get there." Zhang Feng nodded and didn't say much, turning around and getting off the bed, walking towards the door. As he walked he said, "Let's go eat something first, we'll go find it later." After that, he didn't care about their reactions and walked straight to the cafeteria. In fact, Zhang Sun, Chong and the others were already hungry. When they left Zhang Mansion yesterday they didn't eat a single bite. When they arrived at the research institute, they were dragged to be lab rats. Their stomachs were already numb. This was especially true for Cheng Chimo. This guy had a huge appetite. Usually he would not be full without some food. Yesterday he was already hungry when he was doing the experiment. However, in the end his stomach no longer felt hungry, so he did not feel hungry anymore. Now that he heard about eating, it was as if his primitive desire was awakened. His eyes began to turn green. Without waiting for Zhang Feng's instructions, they rushed to the cafeteria one after another. "Boss, give me your braised meat, roasted chicken, roasted duck and steamed buns." Cheng Chimo randomly found a seat, waved his hand and shouted at the boss. When the boss heard this he realized that this wasn't a meal. This was clearly a robbery. Just as he was about to step forward to speak, he saw Zhang Feng walk in from the door. He quickly went up to him and said with a smile, "Director, you're here. What would you like to eat today?" Zhang Feng did not immediately reply. Instead he glanced at Cheng Chimo and the others and winked at the boss. "Give them all the food they ordered. Put it on my tab." He heard Cheng Chimo's roar before he entered the door. Although these guys were a little overbearing, they were still his brothers. Since they came to the academy he could not treat them badly. Besides, this was his own fault, so there was nothing to say. The boss looked deeply at Cheng Chimo, nodded and left. Soon the food was served one by one. Cheng Chimo's eyes turned green when he saw this. He threw the chopsticks aside, grabbed the food with his hands and stuffed it into his mouth. He said while stuffing, "Feng Zi, you're so kind. You know I'm hungry." Zhang Feng looked at Cheng Chimo with disdain. Like Lao Tzu, like son. This guy ate the same way as old Cheng, directly holding the food in his hands. However, he could not say this. He smiled and said, "Well, eat as much as you want." In his heart he thought, "I hope you don't bother Lao Tzu when you're full." Zhang Sun, Chong and Du Go were somewhat educated. At first they ate slowly with chopsticks. Later, perhaps they were not satisfied with this way of eating, or perhaps they were envious of Cheng Chumo, so they directly stuffed their hands into their mouths. However, these two guys usually did not have a big appetite. How could they eat so much food? Moreover, after being hungry they started to vomit. Seeing this, Zhang Feng had no appetite at all. He had no choice but to open another table to avoid being tormented by these fellows. The meal was finally over. Cheng Chumo patted his round belly, looking very satisfied. Feng Zi, thank you for your hospitality this time. Next time we go to Chang'an I'll entertain you. Now should we go find something? Zhang Feng glanced at Cheng Chumo unhappily. Wipe the oil on your mouth first. After that he turned and left. Cheng Chumo rolled up his sleeves and casually wiped his mouth. He hurriedly chased after him. Feng Zi, wait for me. Chapter 1947. When Zhang Sunchong and Du Go saw this, they hurriedly chased after him, afraid that the duck in their mouths would fly away. The group walked towards the workshop and arrived in a short while. Before they entered the cave they felt waves of heat. Cheng Chumo felt that the oil on his body was about to be squeezed dry. He opened the hole and glanced inside. Feng Zi, why is it so hot in here? You think it's hot? Zhang Feng glanced behind and smiled. You don't have to come if you don't think it's hot. I didn't force you to come. After he finished speaking he walked into the cave. Zhang Sunchong glanced at Cheng Chumo and smiled. Tainyo, are you defeated? I told you not to speak when you shouldn't. Are you happy now? After he finished speaking he walked into the cave as well. Dugo didn't say anything and followed Zhang Sun into the cave. Cheng Chumo was stunned. Did he say something wrong? He only said one sentence of truth? Shaking his head he could only walk in. The cave was very dry. As soon as they entered the cave, they smelled saltpeter mixed with the smell of various metals. This was the unique smell of the workshop and was also a symbol of the workshop. As they walked further in they heard the sound of metal colliding. It was like a musical movement, singing and dancing for the workers inside. The deeper they went, the higher the temperature. They felt that their clothes were about to be dried by the heat. Finally, the group passed through the tunnel and their eyes suddenly opened up. This was like a small world. The surrounding walls had all been mined, chiseled into an oval-shaped world. There were many small holes in the middle, and an oil lamp was placed in each hole, illuminating the entire mine very clearly. Below, a group of workers were holding metal hammers and hammering some kind of weapon. From time to time they would put the weapon in the furnace to quench it. Then they would take it out and put it in the water. Then they would examine it carefully. Just like that they repeatedly hammered, quenched and quenched. They kept repeating the same process. Behind this group of people, there was a round table, and around the table sat 3 to 5 big men. Their upper bodies were naked, and there was a cup of turbid liquid in front of them. It looked like some kind of tea, and under these cups, there were some papers with all kinds of pictures drawn on them. A burly man picked up the cup in his hand and was about to drink when he inadvertently glanced at the cave entrance. As if he saw something, he suddenly stood up and shouted, "Dean?" This roar immediately alarmed everyone. "Dean, it's the Dean. The Dean is back." Everyone stopped what they were doing and looked towards the entrance of the cave. Immediately they were overjoyed and cried out in surprise. Zhang Feng smiled and raised his right hand to greet everyone. "Thank you for your hard work." After saying that, he slowly walked down. As he walked, he felt that something was wrong. When he looked back, why did Cheng Chumo and the others disappear? He quickly turned his head and looked around the cave. He saw Cheng Chumo and the other two surrounding the weapon next to the furnace. They seemed to be ready to take it. The corners of Zhang Feng's mouth curled up. Now that these fellows were interested in weapons, they might forget about the heavy armor later. However, he couldn't act so indifferent, or else these fellows would really think that they could take anything. Thus, he hurriedly stepped forward and shouted, "Stop, what are you doing?" Clang! Cheng Chumo was shocked and the Mitsubishi military knife in his hand fell to the ground. He turned to look at Zhang Feng and said angrily, "Fengzi, what are you doing? You scared me." After saying that, he picked up the Mitsubishi military knife in his hand and looked at it excitedly. How could Zhang Feng let him take it so easily? He went forward and snatched it. "Iron Bull, the things in here are treasures. You can't touch them." Cheng Chumo's mouth twitched. He was a little unhappy. What treasures? It's not like Lao Tzu hasn't seen them before. As soon as he said that, a cry of surprise sounded. What's this? Zhang Feng looked in the direction of the voice and saw Zhang Sun playing with a gun. He quickly went forward, but this time he didn't stop the others from admiring it. Instead he smiled proudly. "This is a gun. You guys haven't seen it before, right?" These people had never seen a gun before. It could perfectly attract their attention. As expected, Ching Chumo and Du Go's eyes were all attracted. They looked at the slender thing in a daze. Zhang Feng crossed his arms and said proudly, "This is a good thing that I just developed. Most people haven't seen it before. As long as you have this thing, 1 against 10 won't be a problem. You guys are lucky today. Take it and have a look." He wasn't worried that these guys would be in any danger because this gun was just a gun barrel. It was just a model. There was nothing else installed on it, so it couldn't hurt people. However, Ching Chumo and the other two didn't know that. They only heard that 1 against 10 and instantly became very interested in this thing. They kept playing with it in their hands and kept laughing. However, they couldn't laugh anymore. Chapter 1948. This was because they had discovered a problem. This thing was so thin and long. How could it fight against 10 people at once? Was it supposed to stab the enemy to death? That was obviously impossible. They kept trying it in their hands, but it didn't work no matter how hard they tried. Thus, Cheng Chumo looked at Zhang Feng with a puzzled expression. "Feng, how do you use this thing? Are you trying to fool us?" Zhang Feng's expression changed. He was a little dissatisfied. "Why would I fool you? What's the use of it? Seriously. Then why don't you show us how to use it?" Cheng Chumo handed the gun to Zhang Feng as if it was a matter of course. Zhang Feng obviously couldn't let these guys look down on him. But this gun had nothing. How could it be used? But seeing the doubtful eyes of these guys, he still took the gun. Just as he was about to explain, a shout came from not far away. "Dean?" Zhang Feng was delighted. He naturally knew that it was Arkinon's voice. His savior was here. He turned around and saw Arkinon standing in front of him. He looked at Zhang Feng with a surprised expression. "Dean, when did you come back?" Zhang Feng smiled. "I just came back a few days ago." Arkinon looked around at Zhang Feng and smiled. "It's good that you're not injured. We were worried sick when you went missing. Many of our brothers were even preparing to go down the mountain to look for you." "Ah." Zhang Feng smiled and glanced at the people in the cave. "Brothers, thank you for your hard work." Then he looked at Arkinon. "Thank you for your hard work. How's the thing I asked you to research going?" Before he left, he had asked Arkinon to complete the gun. This time he was looking for something for Cheng Chumo and the others. He was also checking on Arkinon's homework. Arkinon smiled. "Dean, the thing you asked us to do last time is still being researched. But it can be used now." "Really?" Zhang Feng was pleasantly surprised. He had just explained the principle of continuous firing to Arkinon. He didn't expect him to figure it out so quickly. How could he not be happy? If it could be mass-produced in the future, the army of the Tang Dynasty would definitely be stronger. Arkinon smiled and replied, "Yes, Dean." Speaking up to this point, his tone was a little low. "It's just that it's just been researched, so it can't be mass-produced." "Don't worry." Zhang Feng patted Arkinon's shoulder and smiled. "Let's go take a look." Just as he was about to leave, a voice suddenly sounded behind him. "Fengzi, where are you going?" Zhang Feng frowned, thinking that it was these unlucky stars again. However, he still turned his head and smiled. "I'm going to take a look at the weapons I'm researching." "Where are you going?" As soon as he finished speaking, Arkinon pointed at Cheng Chumo and the others and asked, "Dean, why did you bring outsiders here? Usually, the workshop was isolated from the outside world and no one would come in." There were also some precautions inside. Firstly, it was to prevent people from stealing. Secondly, it was also dangerous inside. There were all kinds of weapons, so it was better to prevent people from stealing and other dangerous situations. Zhang Feng naturally knew about this, but he didn't care because Iron Bull and the others were his people. Therefore he looked at Arkinon and smiled. "They are my people." Arkinon nodded and didn't say anything. Since the dean had said so, he didn't want to interrupt. However, Cheng Chumo seemed to be a little dissatisfied. He waved the gun in his hand and asked, "How do you use this thing?" Zhang Feng took the gun and threw it aside. He smiled and said, "This is just a small thing. I'll take you to see the world later." Then he looked at Arkinon and said, "Let's go and see your thing." Cheng Chumo and the others were confused. They had been here before, but they didn't know what was inside. What did he mean by the world? Although they were curious, they still followed. The group walked into another cave. There were all kinds of weapons here. There were Mitsubishi army knives, and some strangely shaped weapons. This attracted the eyes of Cheng Chumo and the others. So this was what Feng Zi meant by the world. Compared to the outside world, this was indeed the world. There were so many weapons here. The three of them couldn't suppress their excitement anymore. They ran to their favorite weapons. Zhang Sun Chong picked up a Mitsubishi army knife and started to play with it seriously. Go chose a Tang saber and waved it around in the air. It was as if he was a great general. Ching Chumo was a little different. He picked up a gun and gestured in front of his chest. He still didn't know how to use it, but he was interested in this thing. He saw from Feng Zi's eyes that this thing was not ordinary. Also, wasn't there a saying that the weirder the weapon, the faster it died? This thing was so weird. Maybe it was good for killing people. Thinking about this, he held the gun and looked at Zhang Feng. Feng Zi, can you tell me how to use this thing now? Zhang Feng didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Arkanon and asked seriously, are these new things you researched? Chapter 1949. Algernon nodded and glanced at the gun in Ching Chumo's hand. According to what you said last time, I've improved all of these guns. They can now fire continuously but only 5 times. Zhang Feng's eyes lit up with surprise. 5 times is already very good. Indeed, with the current technology, being able to fire continuously was already a good achievement. Moreover, it wasn't easy to achieve. Hearing the Dean's praise, Algernon was excited. Thank you, Dean. I will definitely work hard in the future and strive to fire more continuously. Zhang Feng nodded. We'll talk about this later. For now, let's go out and see how effective the guns are. Algernon was naturally happy and nodded in agreement. The happiest person was Ching Chumo. He hadn't let go of the gun since he'd been holding it. He had always wanted to test it. Now that Fengzi had spoken, he was naturally overjoyed. He quickly said, Fengzi, where are we going to test it? As he spoke, he kept fiddling with the gun as if he wanted to show off his prowess immediately. Seeing this, Zhang Feng hurriedly grabbed the gun. He was a little angry. This thing can't be aimed at people. If it accidentally fires, it will kill people. Ching Chumo scratched his head and looked at Zhang Feng with a puzzled expression. Is that good? You're not bragging, are you? Bragging your ass. Zhang Feng picked up the gun and rebuked Ching Chumo. He said angrily, does Lao Tzu look like he's joking with you? After saying this, he didn't wait for Algernon's reaction. He turned to Zhang Sun and the other two and said, hey, you two, stop fooling around. Let's talk when we get out. Zhang Sun and the other two had no choice but to stop what they were doing and look at Zhang Feng with disappointment. Zhang Feng turned to Algernon and smiled. Get the guns and this. As long as it's empty, move it to the back of the mountain. Let's go practice. Algernon nodded, turned around and walked out of the door. After a while, a few big men came in. They first greeted Zhang Feng, then went to carry all kinds of weapons. Zhang Feng didn't say much. He turned around and walked towards the door. Ching Chumo and the others quickly followed him. At the back of the mountain, various weapons were placed on the ground. Ching Chumo still chose his favorite gun. He waved it majestically and said, Feng Zi, can we begin now? Zhang Feng ignored him. He turned to look at Arkanon and said, just like before, put up 3 signs with circles on them. Algernon nodded and whispered a few words to the people around him. A moment later, the sign was set up. Zhang Feng turned his head and looked at Ching Chumo and the others. Weren't you interested in the gun just now? Now that I've prepared everything for you, choose one for yourselves and get ready. After that, he looked at Algernon and said, teach these guys how to use it. In fact, he didn't want Ching Chumo to play with guns. After all, these guys didn't hold back. However, when he thought about the heavy armor, he had to bear with it. Now that these guys were interested in the gun, they might forget about the heavy armor later. Sure enough, the moment Zhang Sun Chong and the others got their hands on the guns, they couldn't bear to put them down as if they were their own treasures. Coupled with Algernon's teaching, their interest was greatly increased, and they all raised their guns to try it out. Zhang Feng didn't want to be outdone. Algernon had just modified the gun, so he had to try it out. He picked up the gun and loaded a few bullets. Then he aimed at the target and narrowed his eyes. He aligned the gun with the gun's muzzle and the bull's eye. This time he felt better than last time. The straight line was much clearer, and the gun was thicker than last time. It was obvious that some other material had been added. As for what it was, he didn't know. He would have to ask Algernon later. Without thinking too much, he put his finger on the trigger and pulled lightly. Immediately, a tongue of flame shot out and the target shook slightly. Why is there no smoke this time? Zhang Feng put the gun in front of him and looked at it with a strange expression. He remembered that the last time he tested it there was smoke. But this time there was no smoke. In other words, it couldn't be seen with the naked eye. In this way it would greatly reduce the danger to those who used the gun. In the past, when those who used the gun fired, there would be a lot of smoke. No matter where they were, they would be discovered by the enemy and their whereabouts would be exposed. But now, without smoke, those who used the gun would not be easily discovered by the enemy. Of course, it was inevitable that there would be noise. but in general it was much safer this way. In this case, wouldn't it be possible to secretly kill the enemy? Or even create a batch of guns specifically for killing the enemy? As he was thinking, there was a sound not far away. Bang bang bang. Zhang Feng turned around. It was Cheng Chumo and the others who were practicing with the gun. Algernon was teaching them from the side. However, it didn't seem to be ideal. The three of them didn't hit a single point. Chapter 1950. Zhang Feng patted Arkinon's shoulder and smiled. Arkinon, how did you modify the gun this time? Why is there no smoke? And it's a lot heavier than before. Arkinon glanced at the gun in Zhang Feng's hand and smiled. Director, this time we added a thin layer of steel to the pipe. That's why it's so heavy. As for why there's no smoke, I think it's because of this thin layer of steel. After repeated experiments, we were able to make it. Zhang Feng suddenly understood. Steel could quickly lower the temperature of a bullet, especially something that could rapidly produce intense heat. It was often effective. However, using it often would still consume it. Therefore, he reminded Arkinon, your idea this time is very good. Science is about repeated experiments, failure, success, and so on. However, the effect of the thin layer of steel this time is not permanent. It can only be considered semi-permanent because it consumes very quickly. In the future, you can continue to experiment and see if there are any other materials that can replace it. Yes, Director. Arkinon nodded. In fact, he also knew that this thing was not permanent. However, it was not a problem to use it now because the smoke was not a big problem for now. Just as the two of them were talking, the sound of gunfire came from the side. Then came the sound of complaints. What the hell is this? It looks powerful, but why can't we hit it? Yeah, we can't even hit it. What's the point of playing? Needless to say, the people complaining were Cheng Chumo and the others. Zhang Feng turned to Cheng Chumo and found it funny. How can you not blame others for not hitting it? Hearing this, Cheng Chumo was not happy. He threw the gun to the side and said, just now I thought that this thing was very powerful, but now it seems that it is not even worth mentioning. Fengzi, you have to find us something else. Not powerful. Zhang Feng smiled and bent down to pick up the gun on the ground. He waved it around. You guys have eyes but can't see. How dare you say this thing is not powerful? Lao Tzu will show you today. After saying that, he raised the gun and pointed it at the target. With a snap of his fingers, the steel ball shot out and the target shook violently. Cheng Chumo's disdainful expression froze. Because he saw a thumb-sized hole on the target. White smoke was still rising from the hole, and there was no sloppiness at all as the hole was directly pierced through. Zhang Sunchong and Du Go were also stunned. Just now, none of them had hit the target. They had always thought that this thing was useless. But now it seemed like that wasn't the case. This thing had easily pierced through the wooden planks and it wasn't damaged at all. If it hit a person, then, wouldn't his flesh be torn apart? At this moment, they immediately changed their view of the blunderbuss. This was a divine weapon, a sharp weapon for killing. Zhang Sunchong could no longer suppress the excitement in his heart. He quickly went forward and grabbed the gun. With a face full of excitement, he said, Fengzi, quickly teach me how to use this thing. Why can't I hit it but you can? That's right. Fengzi, tell us quickly. Cheng Chumo also rushed in front of Zhang Feng, his face full of anticipation. Zhang Feng waved his hand impatiently. Didn't you guys just say that this thing is useless? Why are you saying that it's powerful now? Du Go chuckled, feeling a little embarrassed. Fengzi, that was just then, but now is now. We've seen you display your invincible might, and right now, our admiration for you is like a torrential river. Don't tell me you want to refuse? The corner of Zhang Feng's mouth twitched. This guy had some martial arts and even knew how to flatter people. But why did it feel like he had heard these words before? It wasn't bad. Thinking about this, he raised his head and said proudly, seeing that you guys respect me, I'll reluctantly teach you guys a few moves. Du Go frowned. He thought to himself, you really think you're something? However, he still had a smile on his face. Fengzi, hurry up. Don't dawdle here. Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Du Go and placed the gun on his shoulder. He then looked at the crowd and said, watch carefully. I'll show you once. With that, he squinted his eyes and looked at the crosshair. He aimed at the target and pulled the trigger. A burst of flame spewed out and the target shook. Cheng Chumo's eyes widened in disbelief. Because he had fired more than 5 times but none of them had hit. How did Fengzi hit the target with just one shot? This was a bit amazing. Could this guy be a sharpshooter? Zhang Sun and Du Go also looked at Zhang Feng with a strange expression. The two of them had just fired and deeply understood how difficult it was to hit this thing. Even the aiming finger was shaking non-stop, But Madman actually hit the target with every shot? Could this guy be a freak? Actually, Zhang Feng also didn't think that he could hit it. Just now, instead of saying that he was demonstrating, it was more accurate to say that he was angered. They actually said that the gun wasn't powerful? Now that he hit it, it was a bit hard to believe. Actually, his hitting was closely related to his previous practice. Previously, every time Algernon improved, he would call him over to experiment. Over time, this kind of effect had been achieved, but he didn't know it. Chapter 1951. Cheng Chimo looked at the target, then turned to look at Zhang Feng. He said in surprise, "Feng Zi, you're so good." Although he didn't want to admit it, he still said it subconsciously. Zhang Feng naturally liked to hear these words. He smiled and said, "Of course. You can be like me if you practice more." After saying that, he handed the gun to Cheng Chimo and let him practice. Cheng Chimo took the gun and was overjoyed. It was as if he had mastered the trick. Zhang Sun had other thoughts in his mind. Since the gun was so powerful, it would definitely injure or kill people if it hit them. It would be a little scary if this thing leaked out. What if it hit him? What should he do? He didn't even dare to think about it. It would be perfect if he had a piece of armor that could defend against it. Thinking about it, he looked at Zhang Feng and asked expectantly, "Feng Zi, your gun is so powerful. Is there anything that can restrain it? For example, armor or something like that?" Something that could restrain it? Zhang Feng frowned. He didn't think so much when he was researching this thing. And he didn't need it. However, this fellow's words reminded him of something. If he needed to defend himself in the future or if the gun leaked out, it would be bad for him. With that thought in mind, he looked at Alkinnon and asked with a serious expression, "Alkinnon, have you ever thought about this?" Arkanon naturally heard Zhang Suan's words. He thought for a moment and said, "Dean, have you forgotten? You made something like armor and made it into a special combat suit. It's bulletproof. But I don't know if the improved gun can defend against it." Zhang Feng seemed to remember something. He had made a special combat suit before, but it had been a long time. He didn't know how effective it was against guns. Thinking of this, he quickly asked, "Arkanon, do you still have a special combat suit?" "Yes." Arkanon nodded. The dean left a lot of them in the workshop. Zhang Feng thought for a moment and immediately said, "Take out all the special combat suits immediately. Let's test them and see if they can defend against the firearms this time." Algernon nodded. He turned around and said a few words to the big man beside him. The big man turned around and walked into the cave. After a while he came back with a pile of clothes that looked like armor. Zhang Feng knew that this was the special combat uniform from back then. He hurriedly went forward to take one and weighed it in his hand. It seemed to weigh about a few kilograms and the inside was very thick. It was all steel plates. He handed the special combat suit to Arkanon and said seriously, "Arkanon, tie this special combat suit to the tree." Right now, the special combat uniform was still in its previous configuration. It was hard to say if it could defend against the current firearms. Before the results of the experiment were out, they definitely couldn't experiment on humans. Tying them to a tree was the safest method. Arkanon understood. He led his men to tie the special combat suit to the tree. Seeing this, Zhang Feng looked at Cheng Chimo and the others. He smiled and said, "Now I'll give you a chance to practice shooting. Let's see who can hit the clothes on the tree." "There's no reward for hitting it?" Cheng Chimo asked shamelessly. "How dare you ask?" Zhang Feng looked at Cheng Chimo unhappily and snorted. "I let you hit it so you can practice. You want to ask me for something? If you don't want to hit it, Lao Tzu will find some people. Anyway, there's no shortage of people here. Hit, hit, hit. I didn't say I'm not hitting." Cheng Chimo laughed and hurriedly gave Zhang Sun and the others a look. Zhang Sun and the others were smart. They all raised their firearms and started to fire according to what Arkanon had taught them. Bang, bang, bang. A few shots were fired but none of them hit. Instead, the birds in the forest were scared and flew away. Zhang Feng saw this and curled his lips. He raised the gun in his hand and shouted, "Get out of the way for Lao Tzu. I gave you a chance but you didn't use it. Watch Lao Tzu." Everyone had no choice but to give way. Zhang Feng aimed slightly and raised his gun. The flame spurted out and the tree shook slightly. It seemed that he had hit it. He hurriedly raised his gun and walked to the tree. He saw that half of the special combat suit had been pierced and half of the steel ball had sunk in. Arkanon also walked over. He frowned and said, "Director, this special combat suit is a bit useless. It's been pierced." Zhang Feng did not answer. He took off the special combat suit and studied it carefully. Soon he found a problem. Although there was a steel plate inside, it could not achieve the effect of cushioning. Moreover, steel plate and steel ball were both very hard materials. When they collided with each other, one of them would definitely be damaged. However, if there was no steel plate, what could be used to block the gun? After all, modern bulletproof vests were also made of steel plate. However, there were also some nylon, organic fibers, resins, and so on. Nylon and organic fibers were not available. Chapter 1952. But resin, there was resin. Every tree would secrete it, and there were more pine trees which were more suitable for making bulletproof vests. As long as he put it in his special combat suit, it might work wonders. Although it was winter and there wasn't much resin, as long as there was, it would be enough for an experiment. After making up his mind, he turned to Arkanon and asked excitedly, "Do you have any resin here?" Resin? Arkanon was stunned. He didn't understand why the director was asking this. He didn't know what it was used for. But he couldn't ignore the director's question. He said, "Director, we don't have resin in the cave because we don't usually use it. But there should be some on the mountain. There are a lot of pine trees. Okay, gather some people immediately." Zhang Feng interrupted him and said excitedly, "Remember, the more the better." Arkanon was even more confused. He asked doubtfully, "Director, you're not going to make resin, are you? What's the use of it?" Zhang Feng waved his hand and didn't intend to explain. "Don't worry about that. It'll be useful later. Go gather some people and get some basins to store the resin." He couldn't guarantee whether it would be useful or not since the experiment hadn't been completed yet. He had to wait until it was done. Otherwise he would ruin his reputation. Seeing that the director didn't want to explain, Arkanon went to gather the people. Soon there were a lot of people standing on the mountain. There were at least 100 of them, and every 2 of them held an iron basin. Zhang Feng glanced at them and said seriously, "You must be curious about why I called you here. Now I'll tell you that there's a big project for you to do, and that is to scrape resin. Scrape resin from all the trees on the mountain and put each resin into a basin. I'll need it later." Everyone looked at each other in dismay, but no one said anything. It wasn't that they doubted the director. After all, they spent a lot of time in the cave and had little contact with the outside world. They didn't know what the resin was for. Also, the director's great image was deeply imprinted in their minds. They wouldn't question it and they didn't dare to. However, he was a little puzzled. Why didn't they make a good weapon? Why did they go up the mountain to scrape resin? Seeing this, Zhang Feng continued, "I know that everyone may have some doubts in their hearts, but don't worry. When the resin is scraped off, I will definitely tell everyone why." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone nodded and walked towards the forest with the weapons in their hands. In their hearts, the dean was lofty and omnipotent. Since the dean had given them instructions, they just had to do as they were told. The dean must have his uses. Seeing that everyone had gone to work, Zhang Feng turned to look at Qing Chumo and the others. "You guys go too. Don't stay idle." Qing Chumo was not happy. With a bitter face he said, "Why? We're not coolies, are we? There's strength in numbers." Zhang Feng smiled and glanced at the forest. "Look, everyone has gone to work. Don't you feel embarrassed to be here? Also, when I make the things later, I will definitely give you some benefits." He knew that these guys wouldn't do anything without benefits. When he made the new special combat uniform later, they would definitely ask for it. In that case, it was better to let these guys work first. Moreover, as long as he promised them benefits, they would be more eager than the other. As expected, Qing Chumo's eyes lit up and he said excitedly, "Really? Wait a minute, I want the best." After that, he rushed into the forest with a Tang knife. Zhang Sun Chong and Du Go naturally didn't want to be left behind. They picked up a Tang knife and chased after him. "Tainyo, wait for me." Zhang Feng turned to look at Arkanon and said, "The special combat uniforms I asked you to make before were all made of steel plates, right?" "Yes." Arkanon nodded and thought for a while. "Director, is there something wrong with them?" Zhang Feng took out a cigarette from his waist and lit it. He took a deep puff and then looked at Arkanon seriously. "Actually, we were wrong before. Think about it. Steel balls are made of steel and steel plates are also made of steel. What will happen when the two collide?" Arkanon lowered his head and pondered. Zhang Feng took a puff of his cigarette and continued, "The speed of the steel ball is very fast, we all know this. The moment it is fired from the barrel of the gun, it will produce an extremely high temperature. If it suddenly hits a wooden board, it can easily penetrate it because wooden boards are not strong. This is very easy to understand, but what about steel plate? They are made of the same material. The moment they come into contact, they will produce a higher temperature. That's why the experiment just now failed and the special combat uniform was penetrated. Do you understand?" Arkanon nodded as if he didn't fully understand. He asked with some doubt. Then, as you said, steel plates are useless, right? No. Chapter 1953. Zhang Feng shook the cigarette between his fingers and said seriously, the steel plate is not useless. It's just that it's not very effective when it collides with the steel balls. However, we still have to use the steel plate. Alkinen nodded again, but this time he seemed to have understood something. He quickly said, so you're going to use resin to mix it in? Zhang Feng smiled with satisfaction. Yes, resin has a softening effect, especially when it has a tendency to flow under the influence of external forces. When you punch it, you won't be able to exert any force at all. For example, if a steel ball moves very fast and can cause great damage to anything, it may not be the same for resin. First of all, resin is neither soft nor hard. When you hit it, it will immediately break down the strength of the steel ball. Secondly, even if the steel ball is strong and breaks the resin will still be like what I said just now, breaking down the strength of the steel ball. Moreover, there is a steel plate behind the resin. In this way, the safety factor of the special combat suit can be greatly improved. Alkinen nodded and lowered his head to digest what the director had said. Don't rush. Take it slow. Zhang Feng smiled and said, I just thought of this thing. You'll know the effect when it's done. As soon as he finished speaking, Cheng Chumo and the others ran over with a basin in their hands. Inside the basin was a yellow, sticky substance. It was the resin. Alkinen looked at the basin and frowned. Director, is this the resin you were talking about? Although he had seen resin hanging on trees before, he had never seen such a large basin. Moreover, it was collected. It looked a little strange. Zhang Feng nodded with satisfaction. That's right. This is the resin I was talking about. Then he looked at Cheng Chumo. What tree's resin is this? Every tree's resin had a different effect and usage, so it had to be distinguished. Cheng Chumo scratched his head and looked at Zhang Sun. What kind of resin is this? Pine resin. Zhang Sun rolled his eyes at Cheng Chumo. Oh yes, it's pine resin. Cheng Chumo quickly looked at Zhang Feng and smiled. It's pine resin. Zhang Feng nodded and said to Arkanon, when the others come back, tell them to bring the resin to the cave. We'll go back and do the experiment first. With that, he led Cheng Chumo into the cave. Arkanon gave a few orders to his subordinates and hurriedly followed. Inside the cave, Zhang Feng looked at the resin in Cheng Chumo's hand and said, pour all the resin into the furnace. The resin had just been scraped off and there were still many impurities. It needed to be quenched at a high temperature to obtain the final essence. Although some of it would be lost, it had to be done for better effect. Moreover, the resin would turn into a liquid after high temperature, which was more suitable to be added to the special combat suit. However, Arkanon didn't know this. He asked worriedly, Director, will it all evaporate if it's poured into the furnace? Zhang Feng shook his head and said, no, it won't. The resin is not a liquid, nor is it a solid. It's semi-solid. It will only be quenched if it's put in the furnace, but the temperature can't be too high. Lower the temperature to 60 degrees first. Arkanon nodded and asked his subordinates to operate the furnace. After a while, the furnace's temperature was lowered. Zhang Feng looked at Cheng Chumo and the others and said, now pour the resin into the furnace and see what happens. Cheng Chumo curled his lips and glanced at the furnace. He felt the heat before he even got close. How could he pour it? He looked at Zhang Feng reluctantly, but Zhang Feng gave him a cold look. He had to carry the basin into the furnace and pour the resin into it despite the intense heat. However, the resin didn't seem to want to go down. It was lying on the bottom of the basin. Cheng Chumo had to dig with his hands. After a long time, he finally got the resin into the furnace one by one. Soon there was a crackling sound in the furnace like firecrackers. Cheng Chumo looked at the furnace in surprise and stammered, Fengzi, what's going on? Zhang Feng didn't answer. Instead, he leaned forward to take a look. He saw that the resin was rolling in the furnace and constantly making noises. In a few moments, it turned into a liquid just like water. However, the color didn't change. It was still yellow. He turned around and glanced at the others. He smiled and said, it's okay. It's just the resin rolling in there. It'll be fine in a while. Let's sit down and have a rest. After that, he didn't care about the others' reactions. He walked to the round table and sat down. Arkanon glanced at the furnace and came to Zhang Feng. Director, how long will it take to quench it? Zhang Feng frowned. In fact, he didn't know. This was the first time he had experimented with this thing. How could he know? He could only say, I don't know. It'll be fine after the noise stops. Chapter 1954. Then he seemed to think of something and added, go and prepare some steel plates and steel bars. We'll need them later. Alkinen nodded. He didn't say much and gave his men some orders. As for Cheng Chumo and the others, although they were curious, they couldn't see anything. They just sat aside and waited quietly. Time passed bit by bit. After about the time it took for an incense stick to burn, the crackling sound inside the furnace stopped. Zhang Feng stood up abruptly and went forward to take a look. The resin had changed color and was completely transparent. There were no impurities at all. He hurriedly said to the worker next to him, "Pour the resin out quickly." Alkinen had already prepared a basin. The resin was as clear as water. However, unlike water, the resin was slightly thicker and gave off a faint smell of flowers and plants. Cheng Chumo looked at the resin and smiled. This thing was yellow just now. Now it's white. How amazing. Zhang Feng didn't pay any attention to this guy's nonsense. Instead, he looked at Arkanon and said solemnly, "Take out the steel plate and put it in the resin. You must soak it in." Alkinen nodded. He also understood the importance of this matter. He hurriedly took out the steel plates and put them in the resin without saying anything. Soon the resin covered the steel plates. Zhang Feng hurriedly said, "Take it out quickly. Otherwise the resin will dry up." Alkinen hurriedly took out a steel bar and put it in the resin. He tried to pick up the steel plates but they were too heavy. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't pick them up. Zhang Feng was anxious. He hurriedly waved to Cheng Chumo and said, "Tainyo, come and help. Otherwise it will be over soon." Cheng Chumo didn't intend to help at first, but seeing Feng Zi so anxious, he went forward. He was strong. He took the steel bar and picked up the steel plates with a little force. Zhang Feng hurriedly said, "Put the steel plates aside to dry." "Okay." Cheng Chumo nodded his head and put the steel plate aside before giving up. Zhang Feng squatted down and looked at the steel plate. It seemed to be coated with a thin film. It was wet, slippery and elastic. He immediately understood that the experiment was a success. He quickly turned to Arkanon and said with a look of surprise, "Continue to put in the steel plate until all the resin is used up." Alkinen nodded and put down the steel plates beside him. He repeated the process until all the steel plates were covered with resin. Alkinen and Cheng Chumo did not stop until all the steel plates were covered with resin. Zhang Feng glanced at the neatly arranged steel plates. There were about 50 of them, which was enough to make 20 special combat suits. Thinking about it, he turned to Arkanon and asked, "How much resin do we have left?" Arkanon thought for a moment and replied, "About 5 more pots." Zhang Feng nodded. "Pour all the resin into the furnace. Then take out the cloth for the special combat suit. Let's start." The cloth for the special combat suit was different from the traditional ones. It was soaked in plant sap to increase the fiber of the cloth. It could also dye the special combat suit and conceal it. Arkanon said a few words to his subordinates and they quickly brought the cloth over. Zhang Feng touched the cloth. It was indeed stronger. He looked at Cheng Chumo and the others. "Don't just stand there. Come and help." Then he handed the other end of the cloth to Cheng Chumo. He cut along the thread and a large piece of cloth was cut off. "Cover the steel plate with this cloth." Zhang Feng handed the cloth to Cheng Chumo and ordered. Cheng Chumo nodded and covered the steel plate with the cloth. Then he looked at Zhang Feng. "Now what?" "Put the steel plate in the pot." Zhang Feng pointed at the pot beside him. Then he looked at Arkanon and said seriously, "Pour the resin out of the furnace onto the cloth." Arkanon nodded and ordered the workers to pour the resin onto the cloth. In an instant, the cloth shrank and covered the steel plate perfectly. There was no gap. The surface of the cloth was covered with a layer of resin. If one didn't look carefully, they wouldn't be able to see it. Arkanon looked at the steel plate. Then he looked at Zhang Feng with a strange expression. "Director, it's done." Zhang Feng crossed his arms and looked at the steel plate seriously. He thought for a moment and said, "Were there any other steps to make the special combat suit?" Arkanon shook his head. "No. Just put 2 steel plates and it took shape. Then it's done." Zhang Feng nodded slightly and said seriously, "Now we just have to wait for the resin to cool down. Then we can start the experiment." After he finished speaking, he casually found a stool and sat down. He took out a cigarette from his waist, lit it with a lighter, and started smoking with a satisfied expression. Seeing this, Cheng Chumo and the others also came over and said with a smile, "Feng Zi, give us one too." Chapter 1955. They hadn't smoked since they came to the academy. Now that they saw Feng Zi smoking, they craved for it. Zhang Feng also understood that these guys were probably addicted to smoking. He smiled and took out 3 cigarettes from his waist and threw them to the 3 of them. Cheng Chumo took out a lighter from his waist. The 3 of them huddled together like a group of drug addicts. Of course, Algernon didn't have such hobbies. He squatted in front of the steel plate and felt that the temperature was about right. He touched it with his hand. As expected, the temperature had dropped. He quickly turned to Zhang Feng and said, "Director, the temperature has dropped." Hearing this, Zhang Feng threw away the cigarette in his hand and stood up abruptly. He touched the steel plate and couldn't help smiling. "It's not as fast as this thing." Then he looked at Algernon and said, "Take it out and get ready for the experiment." Algernon nodded, picked up the special combat suit and walked out of the door. Ching Chumo hurried to follow him. At the back of the mountain, Zhang Feng looked at the special combat suit in Algernon's hand and said with a smile, "Tie it to the tree. Let's start." Algernon nodded and tied the special combat suit to the tree. "Now I'll give you a chance. Shoot that suit. How about it?" Zhang Feng turned to Ching Chumo and the others and smiled. Ching Chumo and Zhang Sun looked at each other and didn't say anything. They knew that it was a practice and there was no harm in it. So they took out their guns and started to aim. Bang bang bang. After 3 shots the tree only shook a little. It seemed that only one of the shots hit the target. Zhang Feng didn't care who hit the tree. He strode forward and saw a steel ball scattered on the ground. The special combat suit on the tree only had some marks, but it didn't crack. He quickly took off his special combat uniform and checked it in his hands. Sure enough, the effect was much better than before. There were only some marks left and there was no damage at all. Arcanon also bent down and looked at it carefully. He said in surprise, "Director, your method is really effective. This special combat suit not only blocked the steel balls, but also didn't get hurt." Zhang Feng nodded and stroked the marks on the special combat uniform. He smiled and said, "This method needs to be widely promoted." At this point he frowned. "It's just that the resin alone isn't good enough. If you have other things in the future you can try adding a little more." Algernon nodded. Suddenly he thought of something. "This special combat suit is so effective. I wonder how it will look on a human. Wearing it on a human body?" Zhang Feng raised his eyebrows. He hadn't tested this yet, so he didn't know what would happen. He had already tested it on a tree, but humans and trees were different after all. If someone, with that in mind, he turned to look at Ching Chumo and the others. Ching Chumo only felt his body tremble, and a wave of coldness hit him in an instant. Because he felt that Feng Zi's gaze was somewhat malicious. It was similar to the gaze he had when he went to Xingzhou last time. He quickly took 2 steps back and said with a trembling voice, "Feng Zi, what do you want to do?" Zhang Feng stood up and chuckled. "Nothing much. It's just like an experiment. I wonder which one of you is willing to sacrifice yourself for science?" Sacrifice himself? Hearing this, Zhang Sun felt a chill. He still remembered that Feng Zi had almost killed him when he said this last time. Now he was asking him to sacrifice himself? Wasn't that asking him to die? He quickly shook his head. No, no, no. I'll leave such a great thing to you." Zhang Feng's face changed slightly, but he still smiled. "Don't worry, it's not a big deal. Just one of you put on the special combat suit and stand there. Nothing will happen." Sure enough, it was like this. Dugo's legs were a little weak. Just now he had already guessed that this Feng Zi was crazy. He wanted him to be the target. If he didn't pay attention and missed, wouldn't he die? He had personally used the gun just now. Although he didn't hit the target, he could see the power. If he hit a fatal spot, he would definitely die. How could he go? He quickly waved his hand. "No, no, no, I'm not going." Zhang Feng's face completely changed. He frowned and said angrily, "You bastards, when we went up the mountain, all of you ran faster than me and insisted on some benefits. Now I'm asking you to do an experiment and you're refusing. Are you itching for a beating again?" Ching Chumo's face was bitter. When they went up the mountain, they didn't say that they were going to do such a deadly experiment. Why was he blamed now? He quickly explained, "Feng Zi, you're wrong. You didn't say it when we went up the mountain. Now that we're here, you don't admit it. How can there be people like you?" "Yes, Feng Zi, you're not kind." Zhang Sun hugged Ching Chumo, his legs trembling. Dugo also had a look of reluctance. He hugged Zhang Sun and shouted at Zhang Feng, "Feng Zi, you're a little unreasonable. We're people, not trees. If you want to do an experiment, are there not enough trees for you to shoot?" Chapter 1956. How can a tree be the same? Zhang Feng roared in annoyance. He knew that these guys were afraid and what he said made sense. Trees could be used for experiments, but the effects of trees and humans were different. Even if these guys didn't want to do the experiment, they still had to find other people to do the experiment. There was no difference at all. He thought for a while and put on a smile. "I know you guys are afraid. How about this, whoever wants to do the experiment, I'll give him the special combat uniform later. You guys can see that it's not dangerous at all. Look, isn't the special combat uniform fine? Special combat uniform? Ching Chimo was stunned. He really wanted this thing. After all, there was no man who didn't like this kind of thing. However, it was a little uncomfortable to be hit by a gun. However, after thinking about it, what Feng Zi said made sense. There was no danger when it was tied to a tree. If it was tied to a human, it probably wouldn't be dangerous, right? Thinking about it, he probed, "Is what you said true? Is it really not dangerous to hit a human?" Before Zhang Feng could answer, Zhang Sun took it. He looked at Ching Chimo nervously. "Iron Bull, are you crazy? You dare to try this thing? Do you want to die?" Ching Chimo gave Zhang Sun a look. Then he put his left hand on Zhang Sun's shoulder and his right hand on Du Go's shoulder. They formed a circle and said softly, "You guys don't understand. Lao Tzu saw it just now. This special combat uniform is really powerful. Later we'll talk to Feng Zi about the conditions. We'll get this thing. Also, think about it, would Feng Zi hurt us? After all, we're brothers." When Zhang Sun and Du Go heard this, they felt that it made sense. They said, "Okay, you can try it later." They were still a little scared. Since Iron Bull wanted to die, they would let him have it. Ching Chimo rolled his eyes at Zhang Sun. "Okay, don't be jealous later." As soon as he finished speaking, Zhang Feng's voice came. "What are you guys discussing?" All right. Ching Chimo quickly responded and turned to look at Zhang Feng. "Feng Zi, is what you said true? Is that thing really not dangerous?" Although he was a little shaken, he still wanted to confirm it. After all, this thing hitting a body was not the same as hitting a tree. Zhang Feng saw that this guy was a little moved and smiled. "Of course, I made it myself. Don't you trust me?" Ching Chimo gave him a look of disdain as if to say, "Of course I don't trust you." Of course he wouldn't say that out loud. Therefore he said, "Feng Zi, it's not that I don't trust you, but this thing is dangerous. You have to." At this point, he glanced at the gun on the ground, the meaning of which was self-evident. Zhang Feng naturally knew what Ching Chimo meant. He just wanted the gun. This thing was so powerful. What if it hurt someone? In addition, this guy was a troublemaker. Moreover, the gun hadn't been released yet. Once it was released, it would definitely cause a huge uproar. With all these reasons combined, he couldn't give it to him. He immediately refused. "No, this thing is different from other things. I can't give it to you. You can choose other weapons." "Other weapons?" Ching Chimo frowned and glanced at the other weapons on the ground. The Mitsubishi Army knife. He had played with it before. There was nothing good about it. The Tang knife was no good either. The Mo knife was even worse. After looking around for a while, he still couldn't find a single one that caught his eye. He frowned and said with some dissatisfaction, "Feng Zi, are you trying to send me off with these toys? None of them caught my eye. I just want your gun. Are you going to give it to me or not? If you give it to me, Lao Tzu will immediately wear it and stand neatly for you. You can fight however you want as long as you leave some descendants for the Qin family." Zhang Feng was stumped. The gun was so powerful. It was absolutely impossible to give it to this guy. Otherwise, Chang and city would be turned upside down in less than 3 days. The entire Qin family would be finished. However, if he didn't give the gun, he wouldn't be interested in the other things. What should he do? Should he make a composite bow for this guy? A composite bow and a gun had the same effect. Moreover, for Iron Bull, a composite bow was better than a gun. He just didn't know if this guy could accept it. With that thought, he looked at Ching Chimo and said with a smile, "Iron Bull, it's not that I don't want to give you the gun, but this thing is too powerful. If you take it, what if it goes off and you kill someone? What if you kill a noble? What about the Qin family?" Hearing this, Ching Chimo fell silent. It wasn't Zhang Feng's words that convinced him. It was because he remembered something. If he brought the gun home, the heartless old Ching would definitely confiscate it. Moreover, old Ching had a group of brothers such as Uncle Yuchi and Uncle Qin. They were all famous people. If they saw that he had such a treasure, wouldn't they snatch it? Chapter 1957. But this gun was so good, how could he let it go? After thinking about it, he still wasn't willing to give up, so he said, "Then what do you mean? You're not giving it to me?" "I didn't say that I'm not giving it to you." Zhang Feng waved his hand and looked at Ching Chimo with a smile that wasn't a smile. "I'm planning to give you something else. Think about it, if you take the gun, I'm afraid you'll get yourself into trouble." Ching Chimo fell silent again. Actually, he wasn't afraid of getting himself into trouble. His father was Lu Guogong, who would dare to touch him. He was just afraid that the gun wouldn't fall into his hands. That would be King tragic. Thus, he could only ask, "What's the other thing you were talking about?" Zhang Feng saw that this guy was interested and felt that there was a chance. He quickly said, It's a type of bow, I call it a composite bow. Before he could finish, Ching Chumo gave him a look of disdain. I was wondering what it was, but it turned out to be a bow and arrow. What a stupid name. What composite bow? Ba Lao Tzu has a lot of them at home. If you want one, Lao Tzu can give it to you. Zhang Feng was unhappy when he heard this and immediately retorted, "Don't F***." King looked down on Lao Tzu's bow and arrow. Lao Tzu's bow and arrow isn't something that trash like yours can compare to. Listen carefully, Lao Tzu's bow and arrow requires at least 200 dan of strength to draw. Every arrow can pierce through stone and gold, and has a range of 3 li. Its power is even more powerful than a gun. Of course, this was a bit exaggerated, but it was to attract Ching Chumo's attention. Exaggerating a bit would have a miraculous effect. As expected, Ching Chumo was stunned. What the hell? 200 dan of strength to draw? One arrow could pierce through stone and gold? And the range was around 4 li? Then wouldn't it be around 1500 meters? If he could get a bow like this, it would be a wonderful thing. Moreover, what Feng Zi said made sense. Even if he obtained the gun, he might not be able to enjoy it. Perhaps that unscrupulous old Ching would snatch it away. After thinking for a while, he probed, "Is the bow you mentioned real?" "Of course it's true." Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Ching Chumo and snapped, "Are you being reasonable? If you don't come, Lao Tzu will find someone else." "Come." Just as Ching Chumo was about to agree, Zhang Sun couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed Ching Chumo and laughed, "Brother Tainyo, you were in the limelight just now. Why don't you give this bow to me?" Dugo also laughed and said, "Yes, yes, yes. Brother Tainyo, let us have this thing." Ching Chumo's expression changed. He looked at Zhang Sun and Dugo with dissatisfaction. "When Lao Tzu went to negotiate, the two of you were like dead people. Now you F*** King jumped out? And you want Lao Tzu's godly bow? Dream on." He waved his hand and hit the two of them to the side. He said angrily, "Get lost you two. Did you go eat just now?" After saying that, he walked towards Zhang Feng with a smile. It was a stark contrast to his disdainful attitude just now. Zhang Sun and Dugo were unhappy. How could they let go of such a good thing? They strode forward and hugged Zhang Feng. They cried, "Feng Zi, we will also be your target. Give us one of your godly bow." Zhang Feng laughed. Just now the two of them were on the same side as Ching Chumo. Now they changed their attitude so quickly? And they were still acting shamelessly? If he didn't give it to them, the two of them definitely wouldn't give up. If he gave it to them, Iron Bull probably wouldn't be willing. After thinking about it, he decided to give it to them. He couldn't let these guys drag him down. He shook his legs and said helplessly, "Are you guys bored? Isn't it just a bow? I'll give it to you." Anyway, the bow hadn't been made yet. When the time came, he would make more. Moreover, these two guys' physiques weren't suitable for using a bow. They were just enjoying the novelty. However, Zhang Sun felt different. He thought that the bow was awesome. He jumped 8 feet high and said with a smile, "Feng Zi, let's start. Use the gun to hit me." "Hit me first, hit me first." Ching Chumo pushed Zhang Sun away. He was a little dissatisfied. Looking at these guys fighting to be the first, Zhang Feng wanted to laugh. Just now they were all unwilling and now they were fighting to be beaten? He suspected that these guys were a little perverted. He smiled and waved his hand. "One by one. Don't rush. Iron Bull came first. Let Iron Bull eat the bullet first." Ching Chumo snorted and pushed Zhang Sun away. He raised his head high as if he was showing off. When he came in front of Zhang Feng, he immediately changed his expression and said with a smile, "Feng Zi, how do we start?" Zhang Feng handed the special combat uniform to Ching Chumo and smiled. "Put on this uniform and wait under the tree." After saying that, he seemed to have thought of something and reminded him, "It's best to close your eyes. Otherwise you'll be scared." Ching Chumo didn't think too much. He put on the special combat uniform and strode to the tree. Now he only remembered the bow. Everything else had been thrown to the back of his mind. Chapter 1958. After standing still, he shouted excitedly at Zhang Feng, "Feng Zi, you can start now. Hurry up." Zhang Feng nodded. He picked up the gun and placed it on his shoulder, ready to aim. When he saw Ching Chumo's face, he couldn't help but feel nervous. In the past, he had shot a lot of targets, but this was his first time hitting a person. If he missed, then Tainyo's life would be gone. However, there was no problem with shooting targets just now. There shouldn't be any problem with shooting people now, right? He tried to comfort himself, but his palms were still sweating. On the other side, Ching Chumo couldn't help but ask when he saw that Zhang Feng hadn't fired yet, "Feng Zi, what are you waiting for? Hurry up." Ching Chumo's words pulled Zhang Feng back from his deep thoughts. He looked carefully, wiped the sweat on his hands and decided to shoot. There was no way to be nervous. No one had shot anyone before and he was the same. This time it was for science. Even if he missed Iron Bull, it was a sacrifice for science. Moreover, he shouldn't miss. Thinking, he narrowed his eyes and looked at the crosshairs in the special combat uniform. He deliberately didn't look at Cheng Chimo's face so that he wouldn't be nervous. Sure enough, this method had some effect. His palms weren't sweating anymore. He focused and gently pulled the trigger. A burst of flames spewed out. Cheng Chimo screamed and fell back. Zhang Feng was taken aback. He had clearly taken aim. Why did this guy fall to the ground? He quickly stepped forward and picked up Cheng Chimo. He glanced around and didn't find any external injuries. Could it be an internal injury? He quickly reached out and checked around but still didn't find any injuries. Wasn't this thing knocked out by the shock? Thinking of this, he quickly shook Cheng Chimo and shouted, "Iron Bull, don't die, Iron Bull." Zhang Sun also rushed over. When he saw Cheng Chimo lying on the ground, his expression changed. He couldn't help shouting, "Tainyo, Tainyo, what happened to you?" As they spoke, the two of them imitated Zhang Feng and kept shaking Cheng Chimo, trying to shake Cheng Chimo awake. Cheng Chimo didn't know if it was the shaking of the crowd or if he wasn't injured at all. He suddenly sat up, which scared the crowd and made them step back. Zhang Feng pointed at Cheng Chimo and asked in a trembling voice, "Iron Bull, what happened to you just now?" Cheng Chimo didn't answer immediately. Instead, he rubbed his head as if trying to recall something. After a while, he said, "I think I was hit just now." "Nonsense. Would you be lying down if I didn't hit you?" Zhang Feng suddenly stood up and stared at Cheng Chimo. "Lao Tzu is asking why you fainted?" Zhang Sun and Du Go also nodded. They were scared by this guy just now and their legs were still weak. Cheng Chimo ignored the crowd and rubbed the back of his head because he felt a little uncomfortable. When he touched it, he felt a sharp pain. He screamed, "Ah, Lao Tzu's head." Zhang Feng hurriedly stepped forward and grabbed the back of Cheng Chimo's head to take a closer look. It turned out that this fellow had a big bump on his head. It looked like he had bumped into something, but in such an open space, where could he have bumped into? Zhang Feng curiously turned his head to take a look. A tree behind him immediately attracted his attention. The bark on the tree was gone. He instantly understood that Iron Bull had crashed into a tree. He quickly turned his head and said, "Iron Bull, King hit a tree." Cheng Chimo's face was full of question marks. He couldn't believe it. How did he hit a tree? Although he didn't want to believe it, he still turned his head to look. He saw that there were still marks on the tree. He could tell at a glance that he hit it. He suddenly jumped up, pointed at the tree and shouted, "How the F***ck did I hit a tree?" Zhang Sun also reacted at this time. He quickly got up and looked at the back of Cheng Chimo's head, then looked at the tree. He couldn't help but laugh. "Iron Bull, King thought you were dead. So you just hit a tree." Cheng Chimo couldn't stand this guy's ridicule. He slapped Zhang Sun's head and said angrily, "You King are the same now." Zhang Sun was still in a good mood. After being hit, he naturally wasn't happy. He jumped up and wanted to fight back. Zhang Feng saw that the situation was not right and quickly reached out to stop him. "Don't hit him. Do you still want the bow?" After saying that, he didn't care about the other's reaction. He looked at Cheng Chimo and said, "Iron Bull, take off your clothes and let me see." Cheng Chimo said, "Oh." He unwillingly stared at Zhang Sun and took off his clothes. Zhang Feng took the clothes and saw that there was no damage. It was almost the same as before. However, he had already guessed this result. After all, Iron Bull was completely fine. If there was a problem with the special combat uniform, this guy might really be lying here. Thinking of this, he looked at Zhang Sun and smiled. "Bug, it's your turn. Come, put on your clothes." Zhang Sun waved his hand and took 2 steps back. He smiled and said, "Feng, didn't Iron Bull already try it? I don't think it's necessary." Chapter 1959. When he saw Iron Bull's appearance just now, he was already a little scared. After all, lying on the ground was not a good feeling, and he did not want to experience it again. However, Zhang Feng did not agree. He stared at Zhang Sun and shouted, "Damn it, weren't you very enthusiastic just now? Why are you so scared now? Are you still a man?" He did not want to force this guy to go, but this guy had already agreed. It was too unreliable to go back on his word now. Besides, it was always good to have one more person to do the experiment. What could Iron Bull alone prove? It could only prove that this guy had a good physique, and the advantages of the special combat suit were not fully reflected. Zhang Sun did not know what Zhang Feng was thinking. He looked bitterly at Cheng Chimo, but he did not expect that the latter would directly look back at him with a contemptuous look. This immediately aroused his competitive spirit. Therefore he turned to Zhang Feng and said with a stern face, "Fengzi, give me the thing." Lao Tzu does not believe it. Zhang Feng had been waiting for this sentence. He quickly handed over the special combat suit and said with a smile, "Come on, find a place to stand. Don't stand against a tree." Cheng Chumo blushed when he heard this. After all, anyone could tell that he was talking about him. Zhang Sun took the special combat suit and glanced at Cheng Chumo with a dissatisfied face. Then he put it on and found an open space to stand. He shouted, "Fengzi, I'm ready. Let's start." Zhang Feng nodded, took a few steps back and put the gun on his shoulder. This time he was not as nervous as before. After all, he had some experience. He aimed at Zhang Sun's special combat suit and raised his hand to shoot. Bang! Bang! Zhang Sun obviously took 2 steps back, but he did not fall down this time. He touched the special combat suit in front of him and did not feel anything unusual. He shouted, "Fengzi, it's okay." Hearing the sound, Zhang Feng was also delighted. He hurriedly strode forward and checked carefully. Indeed, he did not find any new injuries. This was enough to prove that there was no problem with his special combat uniform. Even a skinny person like Zhang Sunchong could defend against firearms wearing it. He smiled and said, "Bug, you don't feel uncomfortable, do you?" Although he didn't seem to have any problems on the surface, he still had to ask. Otherwise, what would he do if he suffered internal injuries in the future? Na Qingxiang thought of Zhang Sun's nonchalant look. He took off his special combat uniform and said with a smile, "No problem." Zhang Feng nodded. He just needed to make sure that this guy was fine. Then he looked at Dugo. "Debing, it's your turn now." Dugo was originally afraid. But seeing that Zhang Sunchong was fine, he thought that he would be fine too. He took the special combat uniform from Zhang Sunchong's hand and smiled at Zhang Feng. "No problem, come on." After saying that, he stood at the position where Zhang Sunchong was standing just now. His face was full of righteousness, as if he was going to sacrifice himself for science. Zhang Feng nodded and took 2 steps back. Then he aimed and pulled the trigger. A burst of flames spewed out. Dugo took 2 steps back and touched the special combat uniform in front of him. Seeing that there was no problem, he shouted, "Fengzi, I'm fine too." Zhang Feng hurriedly went forward and checked. Sure enough, there was no injury at all. It could be said that it was lucky if there was no injury during the experiment. However, if there were 2 or 3 people and there was no injury, then it was definitely due to the special combat uniform. Thinking of this, he handed the special combat uniform in his hand to Arkanon and said with a serious face, "From now on, all the special combat uniforms will be made according to this method." Arkanon also saw the effect of the uniform just now. Naturally, he didn't dare to be negligent. He nodded and said, "Yes, Director." Ching Chumo jumped up. He remembered that Fengzi had promised to give him a composite bow. Now that the experiment was done, he naturally couldn't let it go. "Fengzi, what about the bow you mentioned just now? When will you give it to me?" "Yes, when will you give it to me?" Zhang Sunchong also asked loudly. He was beaten back a few steps just now. He couldn't just let it go. Zhang Feng naturally knew what these guys were thinking. He smiled and said, "We'll do it when we get back. Don't worry." "You haven't done it yet?" Dugo exclaimed. He thought that the bow and arrows were ready. Who would have thought that they hadn't done it yet? "What the hell are you shouting for?" Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Dugo. "Lao Tzu didn't say that he wouldn't give it to you. We'll do it when we get back." It was a good thing that these guys were interested in the composite bow. At least they wouldn't pester him for heavy armor and light cavalry. At worst, he could make some to whet their appetites. Cheng Chumo and the others were a little unhappy when they heard that they hadn't done it yet. However, when they heard that they were going to do it immediately, they couldn't help but be excited. Okay. Fengzi, hurry up." Zhang Feng nodded. He called Arkanon and the others and walked into the cave. Cheng Chumo and the others naturally followed closely behind. Chapter 1960. As soon as they returned to the cave, Cheng Chumo couldn't wait to urge Zhang Feng. "Fengzi, can we start now? What can we do for you?" Zhang Feng didn't answer. He turned to Arkanon and said, "Go and prepare some tuber wood and some ox horns. It's best if they're white. If you can't find any, find some cyan ones. Also, some ox tendons, deer gelatin, horse gelatin, fish gelatin, rhinoceros gelatin, cow gelatin, and other 5 kinds of gelatin." Hearing this, Arkanon frowned. At first, he didn't think it was difficult. Tuber wood was easy to find. After all, they were on the mountain and there were countless woods. But as he listened, he felt that something was wrong. Why were there ox horns? Wasn't this a little difficult? Ox horns were on the head of an ox. If you wanted ox horns, you had to kill the ox. But this was the Tang Dynasty. Killing an ox for no reason was punishable by death. Putting that aside, where could he find ox tendons, deer gelatin, horse gelatin, rhinoceros gelatin, and cow gelatin? You couldn't buy them on the market. Only the royal family had them. This stumped him, and he asked a little worriedly, "Dean, of all the things you mentioned, only tuamu is easy to find. The others are not easy to find. For example, cow horns, cow tendons, deer glue, horse glue, and rhinoceros glue. These things may not be available on the market." Zhang Feng frowned. At first he didn't think too much. He just wanted to tell them the materials of the composite bow. After all, to make a good composite bow, he needed these materials. Of course, it wasn't just for the promise to Cheng Chumo and the others. He also wanted to make a breakthrough and research new weapons. But Arkinen's words completely dampened his enthusiasm. Were these things really so hard to get? He wasn't willing to give up. He asked tentatively, "Go and find them on the market. If you can't find them," he lowered his head and pondered. Ox horns were the best. If they couldn't find them, then they could only use ox horns. For beef tendons, he could only use sheep tendon, deer gelatin was replaced with sheep gelatin, horse gelatin was replaced with donkey gelatin, rhino gelatin was replaced with dog gelatin. In any case, he had to collect all 5 types of glue. Otherwise, the bowstring of the composite bow would not last long, and its power would be greatly reduced. After making up his mind, he looked at Arjunan and continued, "Try your best to buy all the things I mentioned just now, no matter how much they cost. If you really don't have any, buy lamb tendons, sheep's gelatin, deer gelatin, dog gelatin, fish gelatin, rat gelatin, but the effect will be greatly reduced." Seeing that the dean had relented, Arkanon finally heaved a sigh of relief. Cheng Chumo, on the other hand, couldn't hold it in any longer. He jumped up high and said, "No, how can we change the materials? Wouldn't the power of Lao Tzu's godly bow be greatly reduced?" He couldn't accept it. Why would he change the materials if he didn't have them? This composite bow belonged to Lao Tzu, and he definitely couldn't accept its power being reduced. Zhang Sunchong was the same. When he heard that the composite bow's power would be greatly reduced, he shouted, "No, we can't change it. Mother Kerr, did Lao Tzu make it or did you make it? Why are you talking so much nonsense?" Zhang Feng glared at them, and his voice was even louder than the two of them. He shouted, "Where do you expect Arkanon to get these materials? Lao Tzu made it for you and you're already doing him a favor. Why are you still making a fuss here? If you continue to make a fuss, get lost from Lao Tzu." Cheng Chumo was unhappy when he heard this. "This godly bow was made for me. How can it have nothing to do with me? Besides, if Arkanon can't find it, can't Lao Tzu find it?" He remembered that there was a warehouse at home and there were many things given by the palace. It shouldn't be difficult to find things like horns and tendons. Zhang Sunchong saw Cheng Chumo's attitude and said eagerly, "Yes, if you can't find these things, we can find them. But we definitely can't reduce the power of the godly bow." Zhang Feng suddenly understood. Why didn't he think of this earlier? These guys were all businessmen, and it wasn't difficult for them to get these strange materials. For others, this might be a crime punishable by death, but for these notorious rich kids, they could easily find a pile of these materials at home. Moreover, this composite bow was made for them so they would work even harder. But these guys were so confident now, but when they got home they might not have the guts to do so. After all, these materials were very valuable. What if they didn't dare to do it when they got home? No, he had to provoke them. Thinking about this, he deliberately put on an embarrassed expression. "I understand what you're saying, but these things are very valuable. If I go home to take them, I'm afraid I'll be hung up and beaten." "Beaten?" Cheng Chumo glared at him, his nostrils pointing at the sky. "Who the F***ck dares to beat Lao Tzu?" Zhang Feng rejoiced in his heart. He had taken the bait. However, he still put on a worried expression. "If that's the case, come back soon." Chapter 1961. He knew old Cheng's temper. If Iron Bull went back and asked for something so valuable, old Cheng would definitely not give it to him. Iron Bull was also a person who refused to admit defeat, who knew what he would do. Cheng Chumo ignored Zhang Feng's strange concern. He turned to Zhang Sun and Dugo and snorted, "Bug, what do you think? Go home and find the materials?" Zhang Sun Chong naturally agreed. He wasn't afraid that Zhang Sun Wuji would beat him up, because he was the only son in the family. His father was afraid that he would melt in his mouth and dote on him. Moreover, his mother doted on him a lot, so what did he want that she wouldn't give him? A mere bull's horn was still a piece of cake for him. However, Dugo was not so lucky. His father was relatively strict. It would not be easy to get the materials. However, thinking that the power of the divine bow would be greatly reduced, he seemed to muster up some courage. Moreover, Iron Bull and Bug were ready to go. If he did not go, he would seem like a coward. After thinking about it, he nodded and said, "Let's go back and prepare." After saying that, the three of them glanced at Zhang Feng and turned to walk out of the cave. "Go and prepare the logs. The more the better." Zhang Feng saw that this guy had left and said to Arkanon happily. He was not worried that Qing Chumo and the others would not be able to get the horns and other things back. He understood these guys. As long as they heard that something was beneficial to them, they would be more enthusiastic than anyone else. Arkanon naturally did not dare to be negligent. He called his men and went up the mountain to prepare to cut the logs. Qing Chumo, on the other hand, was afraid as soon as he came out of the cave. He was regretting that he had impulsively agreed to Zhang Feng's request. How was he going to tell his old man about such valuable materials? If this was known, wouldn't he be beaten to death? What should he do? Thinking about it, he shifted his gaze to Zhang Sun and Du Go. His eyes turned as if he had thought of something. He revealed a malicious look and said, "I say, brothers, you should know about my family's situation. I, Lao Tzu, am usually very fierce. You should have seen it, right?" Okay. Zhang Sun replied indifferently before turning to chat with Du Go. It was as if he did not care about Qing Chumo's words. In fact, he had already guessed the gist of it. This brat just wanted to complain and then ask for more materials. No way. Qing Chumo saw that Zhang Sun could not be bothered with him, so he turned and ran in front of Du Go. Grinning, he said, "De Bing, I'll tell you the truth. That old Qing of mine definitely won't allow me to take anything. Help me." "Stop." Du Go waved his hand and quickly took 2 steps back. With a look of disdain, he looked at Qing Chumo and said, "Then why didn't you say so earlier? Now you're begging us?" "No way." Zhang Sun Chong nodded his head and hugged Du Go as if they were on the same side. "That's right. Since you didn't mention it just now, don't think about it now. Think of a way yourself." After saying that, he pulled Du Go and ran towards the foot of the mountain. In any case, he was not afraid of not being able to get it. As for Tainyo, he was on his own. However, this made Qing Chumo extremely anxious. When he saw the two running away, he quickly chased after them. "Wait for Lao Tzu." Zhang Sun Chong ran extremely fast. Qing Chumo could not catch up and could only find a carriage to return home. Before he reached the door, his heart was in his throat. He was afraid that he would run into that fierce old Qing of his family. Thus he stood far away and observed for a long time. When he saw that there was no trace of old Qing at the door, he felt relieved and walked towards the door. When he saw a servant standing at the door, he quickly ran up and carefully glanced inside the residence. When he saw that there was no one, he asked softly, "Is my father in the residence?" The servant knew that the young master was afraid of the old master and could understand his thoughts. He leaned over to Qing Chumo's ear and replied, "Young master, the old master just came back from court. He's probably resting now." When he heard this, Qing Chumo's heart sank. If old Qing was not at home, he might be able to beg his mother. But now that old Qing was at home, what could he do? Go back like this? No, if he went back empty-handed, he would definitely be laughed at by Feng Zi and Gu. Lao Tzu was a dignified playboy of Chang'an. How could he endure this? But how could he get past old Qing? Could he steal it? It seemed that there was only one way now. Old Qing might not find out. Besides, even if old Qing found out, he could just live in the academy in the future and wait for old Qing's anger to subside. Thinking of this, he tiptoed towards the storeroom. But at this moment, a loud shout came from behind him. "Stop." He was very familiar with this voice. It was old Qing. His first thought was to turn around and run. He could not let old Qing catch him or he would be beaten to death. However, on second thought, he had not stolen anything yet. He felt more strength in his body. He straightened his back, turned to look at old Qing and said with a smile, "Father, you..." Before he could finish his words, he felt a big slap coming towards him. Then his vision turned black and his face burned. He took 2 steps back before he could steady himself. He was stunned. Why did his father hit him? He had not stolen anything yet, had he? Chapter 1962. Could it be that his father saw something? Thinking of this, his legs went weak and he almost fell to the ground. "Father, I haven't..." "Don't give Lao Tzu excuses." Qing Yaojin strode forward and grabbed Qing Chumo's shoulder. He slapped him again and roared, "Lao Tzu thought you died outside? You still know to come back? Do you know how long Lao Tzu has been out looking for you? You heartless dog, Lao Tzu will beat you to death." After saying this, he slapped Qing Chumo's face again. He scolded him as he slapped him. He felt that the anger that had been accumulating in his heart for a long time had finally exploded. In fact, he couldn't be blamed. Anyone would be angry if this happened to them. Thinking about it, the Qing family only had one son. The huge Qing family was counting on this guy to carry on the family line. In the end, this dog went to Xingzhou with Zhang Feng? What kind of place was Xingzhou? It was the border and there were Turks stationed there. If something happened, what would happen to the Qing family? What would happen to such a huge family business? And the most important thing was that this bastard didn't even inform him when he came back. Instead, he went to fool around with Zhang Feng. That brat Zhang Feng had some talent, but he was full of evil tricks. This trip to Xingzhou was probably planned by this brat. He also wanted to find Zhang Feng to settle the score. However, when he thought about how Li Erlang didn't make a fuss about it and treated Zhang Feng very well, he thought about it and put it aside. Otherwise, it wouldn't be good to get into trouble. Therefore, he practiced martial arts at home and vented the anger in his heart. Coincidentally, this dog Iron Bull came back. He was still worried about how to vent his anger. Since this kid came to meet him, he naturally couldn't avoid a violent beating. As for Cheng Chumo, he could only hold his head and bear it silently. He didn't dare to resist because he knew that the more he resisted, the more excited old Cheng would be and the stronger he would be. When that time came, he wouldn't be able to bear it. He only felt his cheeks burning as if they weren't his own. After the time it took to smoke a cigarette, Cheng Yaojin was probably tired. He lifted his hands and threw Cheng Chumo to the side. He sat on the ground and panted heavily. As he panted, he said, "You dog, Lao Tzu let you go this time. If it was Lao Tzu in the past, he would definitely beat you to a pulp. Now let's talk about Xingzhou." Cheng Chumo's face was bruised and swollen from old Cheng's beating. One side of his face was bigger than the other. It was bruised and red and he was dizzy. He felt as if there was something on his head, and he couldn't hear old Cheng's words. He was panting like a dead dog. When Cheng Yaojin saw that his words were not effective, he raised his eyebrows and kicked him. He roared, "Did you King listen to what Lao Tzu said? Is there something wrong with your ears?" This kick made Cheng Chumo quiver. In an instant he felt a lot sober. He held his cheek and said vaguely, "Father, what did you say just now? Lao Tzu is asking you about Xingzhou? Why are you King pretending?" Cheng Yaojin glared at Cheng Chumo angrily. Cheng Chumo suddenly understood. It turned out that old Cheng didn't beat him because he wanted to steal something. He wanted to ask about Xingzhou? When he thought of Xingzhou, he felt as if his body had hardened. There was no other reason. It was because this incident in Xingzhou had made the Tang Dynasty proud. This time, if his father wanted to ask about Xingzhou, he would brag about it. Maybe he would have a chance to talk about the materials later. Thinking of this, he wiped the saliva leaking from the corner of his mouth and tried to squeeze out a smile. However, this smile was uglier than crying, but he didn't realize it at all. He still said, "Father, this time in Xingzhou we were really awe-inspiring. When I think of it, Feng Zi, Zhang Sun, Chong and Dugo, we were so scared in the sky. Ck get to the point." Cheng Yaojin frowned and was a little angry. He originally wanted to hear something he didn't know, but this guy didn't say anything to the point. Oh, Cheng Chumo nodded repeatedly. He saw that old Cheng's face was not very good, so he didn't dare to be arrogant. He said in a well-behaved manner, "The four of us set off from Chang'an and then went to Xingzhou. Just now it was Feng Zi who suggested that we go to bomb the Turkic camp. The three of us naturally didn't agree, but Feng Zi forced us to go." "Wait?" Cheng Yaojin waved his hand and was a little confused. "Why didn't you agree to go?" He had been fighting all his life and he hated those foreign races the most. Every year they came to the Tang Dynasty to burn, kill and loot. For this reason he and Yu Qigong had jointly submitted a memorial to ask for troops to be sent to the Turkic kingdom. Unfortunately, they were rejected by Li Erlang because of the lack of provisions. Now that this guy had such a good opportunity to kill the Turkic kingdom, why didn't he agree? Was there shit in his brain? He was now very suspicious. Was this Iron Bull his son? Why didn't he have the ruthlessness he had in the past? No, he had to ask that woman of the Chui family later if she had a lover outside. Thinking of this, he narrowed his eyes and carefully looked at Cheng Chumo, as if he wanted to see something. Chapter 1963. Cheng Chumo was chilled by old Cheng's gaze and he didn't dare to answer. Because he couldn't answer. If he said that he was afraid, then according to old Cheng's temper, he would probably be beaten up again. Cheng Yaojin's eyes were sharp, and he sensed something was wrong. He snorted coldly. "Were you King scared at that time?" He knew his son very well. Although he was usually more arrogant than anyone else, as if he had inherited the temperament of the Qing family, when it came to life and death, he would run faster than anyone else. Of course, he didn't object to his son saving his life. But this time was different. He wasn't in any danger and he was even killing Turks. Even if he died, he would be fighting for the glory of the Qing clan. At worst, he would just have to work hard for a few more years to give birth to another child. But running away was wrong. This was king disgrace to the Qing family and the Tang dynasty. Thinking of this, he raised his foot and kicked out, shouting, "What the ck are you afraid of? At worst, Lao Tzu will mourn for you after you die." After saying that, he felt that something was wrong, so he quickly changed his words. At worst, he'll be a hero again after 18 years. Qing Chimo was so scared that he stepped back. His fear of old Qing was deeply buried in his bones. If he was kicked again, he would probably be crippled. He quickly begged for mercy. "Father, don't hit me. I didn't run away. I went with Fengzi and the others." Hearing this, Qing Yaojin withdrew his foot. His expression softened a little, but he still pretended to be angry. "Go on. What happened after that?" Qing Chimo nodded and wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. "I was scared just now, but when I thought about father's usual teachings, how could he let these Turks kill people on the land of the Tang dynasty? So, he and Fengzi dropped explosives on the Turk camp, and it exploded into a sea of fire." Qing Yaojin nodded in satisfaction. Especially when he heard his father's teachings, he felt like a spring breeze in his heart. It seemed like this dog, no, Iron Bull, had not forgotten Lao Tzu's teachings. She was still able to remember Lao Tzu's teachings even when she was in danger. He really didn't raise her in vain. Now it seemed that Fengzi was not bad. Although he was a little reckless, he had at least blown up the Turkic camp and wounded Sheli and Tuli, temporarily removing a scourge for the Tang dynasty. The more he looked at Tainyo, the more he liked him. He didn't think that he was someone else's son anymore. After all, who would dare to bomb the Turkic camp? Only the Qing family's son would dare to do that. As he thought about it, a smile finally appeared on his face. He said rather proudly, "Come tell Lao Tzu what teachings he remembered. In the future, Lao Tzu will be treated as a family heirloom and let everyone in the Qing family know." When Qing Chimo saw that old Qing's expression had improved, he couldn't help but feel happy. But what was this teaching? He raised his head and thought for a long time. Finally, he remembered and hurriedly said, "At that time, I only thought that my father taught me to fight cocks when I was 3 years old, taught me to drink when I was 4 years old, and taught me to give birth when I was 5 years old. I was thinking that if I had died at that time, I wouldn't have been able to play with these things in the future." As Qing Chimo spoke, he smiled proudly because he felt that he had caught old Cheng's appetite. In this way, he might be able to settle the matter of the materials later. However, he didn't know that when he talked about fighting cocks, old Cheng's expression had changed. When he was 5 years old, old Cheng's entire face had darkened. He had never thought that this dog's teachings would be this. These were all things that he had taught his son when he was bored. He treated it as a way to pass the time. He had originally thought that this dog would say something, but in the end, this was it? Could this king be a family heirloom? He could no longer suppress the anger in his heart. Just as he was about to slap him, he saw Qing Chimo turn his head and look at him with a dumbfounded expression. Qing Yaojin's anger seemed to have suddenly dissipated. It wasn't because he was tired, but when he saw the scars on his son's face, he couldn't bear it. He had already been beaten to such a state. If he were to hit him again, he would probably be lying on the bed, right? As he thought about it, he put down his palm and snorted coldly. "Tell your son about these things in the future. Don't mention them in front of Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is still very angry." Qing Chimo had originally planned to brag about old Qing, but when he turned his head and saw that old Qing was about to hit him and put down his hand, he was instantly stunned. Seeing that old Qing was angry, he was even more confused. He asked, "Father, what are you doing?" "It's nothing. Get lost, get lost." Old Qing waved his hand and said impatiently, "Don't fool around outside in the future. Otherwise Lao Tzu will break your legs." Hearing this, Qing Chimo was delighted. He knew that old Qing had let him off by saying this. Since he had let him off, he could go to the storeroom later. He quickly said, "Thank you, father." After saying that, he turned around and ran in the direction of the storeroom. Qing Yaojin frowned when he saw this. According to this kid's personality, if he had just been injured, he would have gone back to the Chui family to complain. Why did he change his personality today? Not only did he not go back to his house, but he also walked in the direction of the storeroom. Chapter 1964. Could it be that this brat wanted to take something from the storeroom? It wasn't impossible. This brat had a criminal record. Perhaps he wanted to do something this time? Was there something strange? Thinking of this, he waved his hand to summon a servant and whispered in his ear, "Follow the young master and see what he's up to." The servant nodded and followed closely behind Ching Chumo. On the other hand, Ching Chumo walked all the way to the storeroom. Seeing the guard standing at the door, he straightened his back and assumed the posture of a young master of the Cheng family. "You two open the storeroom. Lao Tzu wants to go in and check." Unexpectedly, the servant didn't open the door. Instead, he sized up Ching Chumo as if he didn't recognize the person in front of him. "You are?" It wasn't that they didn't recognize Ching Chumo, but Ching Chumo's current appearance was difficult to recognize. One side of his face was big and the other side was small. Furthermore, it was completely red. How could they recognize him? Moreover, this fellow had been wearing the clothes of the Zhang residents ever since he returned from Xingzhou. This was completely out of place with the Qing residents. Therefore, the guard asked this question. However, this question angered Ching Chumo. Lao Tzu was a dignified young master of the Duke. How could no one recognize him now? Moreover, he was a guard of the Qing residents. This was simply humiliating. His young master temper exploded. He glared at the guard and scolded, "You dogs don't even recognize Lao Tzu? Lao Tzu is the young master of the Qing family, Ching Chumo. Do you believe that Lao Tzu will break your legs?" He was so angry that he stomped his feet. He thought to himself, old Qing hit Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu still didn't have a place to vent his anger. Now he's using you guys to vent his anger. Thinking of this, he reached out and prepared to slap them. In the blink of an eye, the guard discovered something. This was the young master. He had been in the Qing residence for many years and naturally knew that the Duke had a bad temper and often hit the young master. Therefore, he was used to all of this. However, he didn't expect the beating to be so fierce this time. Young master's entire face was swollen. No wonder he didn't recognize him just now. Now that young master was angry, he wanted to vent his anger. He sucked in a breath of cold air. His mind suddenly flashed with the notorious reputation of the young master. His legs couldn't help but go soft. He quickly knelt down. "Young master, please spare my life." The slave had eyes but failed to see. Ching Chumo coldly snorted as his palm missed. It seemed that he had yet to vent his anger. He kicked the guard's shoulder and scolded, "Lao Tzu can't teach others a lesson, but can't he teach you a lesson? Open the storeroom door immediately." The guard staggered and quickly returned to his original position. His hands trembled slightly as he said, "Young master, The storehouse had always been managed by the madam who was the young master's birth mother. This madam could be said to be the tyrant of the Qing mansion or even the tyrant of Chang. She had once said that no one should open the storehouse without permission. But now, the young master wanted to open the storehouse without permission. Wasn't that courting death? He didn't dare to provoke this. The young master might be fine if he barged in, but he might be beaten. Cheng Chumo naturally knew this, but he didn't dare to ask his mother for permission. That guy was more powerful than old Qing. He might as well barge in. Anyway, his father wasn't angry. The Shengzhou incident had already been reported to the Qing mansion, so it should be fine. Even if there was trouble, it would be this guard. He clenched his fist and continued to threaten. "Now I'll give you two choices. The first is to be beaten to death by me. The second is to open the door. Choose one." The guard quivered and felt a chill run down his back. He knew the young master's notoriety. If he dared to claim second place in Chang, and no one dared to claim first place. Now that he said he wanted to beat him to death, it didn't seem like he was lying. But if he opened the door, how could he get past the madam? She was someone who was more troublesome than the young master. What should he do? Just as he was vexed, an idea came to his mind. If he fainted and the young master took the key, it shouldn't have anything to do with him, right? After thinking it over, this method was the safest and the best. After making up his mind, he took a bunch of keys from his waist and threw them on the ground. "I don't know anything." With that, he closed his eyes as if he was really in a coma. Ching Chumo smiled. This guy was really clever. Did he really think he could pretend to be in a coma and everything would be fine? But he didn't expose him. He picked up the keys and looked around. Seeing that no one was around, he opened the door and walked in quickly. Cheng Chumo thought that no one saw all this, but he didn't expect that a pair of eyes in the distance saw everything clearly. This person was the servant sent by Qing Yaojin just now. Seeing that the young master didn't come out, he strode to Qing Yaojin. "Master," the young master entered the storeroom. "What?" Qing Yaojin exclaimed and quickly asked, "What did this dog enter the storeroom for?" The storeroom had always been in charge of the tigress. This dog dared to enter without orders? Usually, even he didn't dare to go in. Wasn't he courting death by going in now? The servant shook his head. "I don't know." Chapter 1965. Qing Yaojin frowned. He had a vague feeling that something was wrong, so he strode toward the storeroom. As soon as he entered, he saw Cheng Chumo rummaging through the box. His expression changed and he scolded softly, "You dog, what are you doing?" He didn't dare to raise his voice now. If the tigress found out, then his son would be finished. Originally, he didn't want to get involved in this matter, but Tainyo had gone to Xingzhou and won glory for the Cheng family. How could he bear to see him being trampled by the tigress? That was why he came over and planned to save Tainyo. When Cheng Chumo saw old Cheng coming over, he was first shocked and then afraid. He was afraid that old Cheng would attack him again. But now it seemed that old Cheng wasn't as angry as before. He instantly understood and went up to him with a smile. "Father, I'm looking for a few things. Just pretend that you didn't see it." Bullsh *T. Qing Yaojin shook off Cheng Chumo's hand that was trying to beg for mercy. He glared at him. "Don't you King know that this storeroom belongs to that old mother?" When the servant behind him heard this, the corner of his mouth twitched. He also knew that the master was afraid of the madam and was dissatisfied, but he didn't expect him to say it so openly. However, this was the master's family matter, so he didn't dare to interfere. He could only tug at the master's sleeve. "Why the *CK are you talking about Lao Tzu?" Qing Yaojin turned around abruptly with a dissatisfied expression. However, he saw the servant give him a look. He seemed to realize something and turned to look at Cheng Chumo. He changed his words and said, "Don't you know that this storeroom is under your mother's control? Do you want to die? Hurry up and go out with Lao Tzu." "No, this thing is very important. I won't leave until I find it." Cheng Chumo refused flatly. He was not worried that old Cheng would hit him now because he could see that old Cheng had already calmed down. Moreover, he had actually heard the word tigress just now, but he chose to ignore it because he also knew old Cheng's difficulties. He was bullied by his mother every day. Not only old Cheng but even he was the same. If old Cheng did not agree now, then he would tell his mother that old Cheng had called her a tigress. Qing Yaojin didn't know what Cheng Chumo was thinking. He wanted to pull this dog out of the warehouse, but this guy didn't want to go out. He wanted to find something and he looked like he wasn't afraid of a tigress. This aroused his curiosity, so he asked, "What are you looking for? Could it be more important than your life? What about your mother? Don't you know what your mother is like?" "Of course I know what my mother is like." Cheng Chumo's mouth revealed a trace of a malicious smile. "But with you here, of course I'm not afraid." Qing Yaojin was stunned. He felt that something was wrong but he couldn't put his finger on it. He quickly asked, "What the *CK do you mean?" Cheng Chumo chuckled as if he wasn't afraid of others hearing him. He said at the top of his voice, "You know that I entered the warehouse just now, right? Otherwise why would you come so quickly? And you just called my mother tigress?" Hearing this, Qing Yaojin's heart skipped a beat. He quickly went forward to cover Cheng Chumo's mouth and said softly, "Keep your *King voice down. Are you afraid that others won't hear you?" After saying that, he deliberately stuck his head out and glanced at the door a few times, afraid that outsiders would hear him. He had no choice. Ever since he married this woman from the Chui family, he couldn't control her. Now he was even more afraid. If it weren't for saving his son, he wouldn't have gotten involved in this mess. But he didn't expect that he would be dragged into this bastard's boat as soon as he arrived. It was only now that he realized it. What if the tigress found out? He glared at Cheng Chumo unwillingly. He still didn't want to let go of his hand. "Bastard, what do you mean? Also, what are you looking for?" "Woo-woo." Cheng Chumo's face turned red. He quickly pointed at the big hand on his mouth. Cheng Chumo realized that he was still covering his son. He glared at Cheng Chumo and said, "Bastard, if you dare to play any tricks, Lao Tzu will beat you to death." After saying that, he gently let go of his hand. Cheng Chumo gasped for oxygen. He almost suffocated to death. Finally he felt better. He glanced at Qing Yaojin and said with a smile, "Father, I'm looking for cow horns and cow glue." "Cow horns? Cow glue?" Qing Yaojin frowned and was somewhat puzzled. What was the use of these things? Weren't they just for viewing and eating? Could it be that this bastard wanted to maintain his health? Even if he wanted to maintain his health, there was no need to steal from the warehouse. He asked curiously, "What are you looking for these things for? To eat?" Cheng Chumo shook his head and waved his hand to dismiss the servants. He then leaned over to Qing Yaojin's ear and said, "Fengzi recently made a bow and arrow. He needs these things." Qing Yaojin was even more puzzled. Didn't Fengzi already make a bow and arrow? Why did he want to make one now? Also, what was the use of cow glue for the bow and arrow? Cheng Chimo didn't notice Cheng Yaojin's puzzled expression. Instead, he continued, he said that his bow and arrow needs 200 stones of strength to draw. It can also split gold and stone and take people's lives from 1,000 miles away. Chapter 1966. Hearing this, Cheng Yaojin's eyes widened. What kind of bow would require 200 stones of strength to draw? Wasn't this F***king terrifying? Some soldiers didn't even have the strength of 200 stones. What was there to split gold and stone? Killing someone from 1,000 miles away? This was even more impossible. Even the military's bows couldn't reach this level. Could it be that Zhang Feng's bow was so powerful? The more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. He now believed that Zhang Feng was bragging and tricking his foolish son into coming back to steal. Yes, that must be it. Thinking about this, he grabbed Cheng Chimo's shoulder and said seriously, "Tainyo, did that bastard Zhang Feng trick you into coming back to steal?" He decided that as long as his son said yes, he would go up to Mount Shao to teach Zhang Feng a lesson. Of course, it wasn't that he couldn't beat him up, but it shouldn't be a problem to teach him a lesson. He looked at his son expectantly, hoping that he would tell the truth. However, the result was something he never expected. Cheng Chimo shook off Cheng Yaojin's hand and said expectantly, "Of course not. Fengzi didn't need to trick me. It was me." Speaking of this, his face turned red. At that time, Fengzi wanted to make a divine bow, but he didn't have enough materials. He said that he would use other materials instead, but the effect would be greatly reduced. Thus, Zhang Sun and I rushed over, and Dugo agreed to help him find the materials. What? Cheng Yaojin exclaimed and looked at Cheng Chimo angrily. So it was you who came back to steal? What's the use of that damn bow? Aren't you afraid of being tricked by Fengzi? I won't. Cheng Chimo waved his hand and didn't care. Father, think about it. Fengzi made so many good things before, such as the Mitsubishi Army knife, the hot air balloon, and so on. Isn't it normal to make a divine bow now? Cheng Yaojin narrowed his eyes, clearly thinking about these words. Indeed, Zhang Feng had made many good things before, such as the Mitsubishi Army knife, which was still used in the military. Basically, the things that this kid made were all good. This time, it should be the same, right? Moreover, seeing how Tainyo was so confident, it was more likely. Taking these things wouldn't cause the Cheng family too much loss, so why not just go along with it this time? Maybe he could make something good? Thinking of this, he grabbed Cheng Chimo and stared at him, revealing a smile that made people feel that he was up to no good. Boy, I will pretend that I didn't see what happened just now. You can look for whatever you want, but when you go up the mountain later, you have to take me with you. I want to see what kind of bullshit bow you are talking about. Then what if mother finds out? Cheng Chimo looked at Cheng Yaojin timidly. He said that he wasn't afraid, but when he thought of his mother, he was still afraid. Moreover, Cheng Yaojin didn't mention this just now. Now that he suddenly mentioned it, he was a little caught off guard. Cheng Yaojin didn't care about this because he already had a plan in mind. He waved his hand and said, "When we go up the mountain later, your mother won't know anything. Besides, even if she knows, she won't go up the mountain to look for Lao Tzu." In fact, he had already thought it through. When he went up the mountain with Tainyo, even if the tigress found out, she wouldn't go up the mountain to look for him. Taking a step back, even if they went down the mountain, he could push all the blame to Tainyo and say that Tainyo opened the warehouse privately. Who would know? Guards? Would he dare to say it? At most, Tainyo would be beaten up, and then he would come out to plead for mercy. This was simply perfect. Cheng Chimo had no idea that he had been tricked by his father. He still thought that old Cheng had boarded his pirate ship. He smiled and said, "Father is right. Then let's start looking now?" No. Cheng Yaojin shook his head and pointed at Cheng Chimo. "You're the one who's looking. I'll keep watch outside for you. Otherwise, what if someone comes in?" He now wanted to get rid of himself. As long as he didn't look for things with Tainyo, even if someone found out, the tigress couldn't do anything to him. Of course, Cheng Chimo wasn't stupid. He vaguely felt that something was wrong. However, he couldn't tell. Just as he was about to ask, he saw Cheng Yaojin's back and the door was closed. He was a little disappointed, but when he thought of the divine bow, he immediately became spirited again. He couldn't care less. He rolled up his sleeves and began to search the boxes one by one. After about half an hour, he finally found cow glue, cow horns, donkey glue, and other things. He was so happy that he almost jumped up. He hurriedly opened the door and was about to go out when a fat head blocked his way. It was Cheng Yaojin. Cheng Chimo chuckled and waved the cow glue in his hand. "Father, I found something." Cheng Yaojin was delighted. He turned his head and looked around. Seeing that there was no one around, he snatched the cow glue and other things. "This thing is precious. Lao Tzu will keep it for you first. Chapter 1967. How could Qing Chimo agree? This was something he had found himself. Just as he was about to ask for it, he saw that old Qing had already slipped out of the door. He became anxious. Father, wait for me. As he spoke, he had already started chasing after Qing Yaojin. As soon as he caught up, he hurriedly stretched out his hand and said, Father, I found this. How can you snatch it? Who was Qing Yaojin? What had he not snatched before? How could he relent now? He put the beef glue and the other things in his arms and glanced at Qing Chimo. We'll talk later. Let's go out first or your mother will catch us. His words were naturally to coax Qing Chimo. Now it was best to leave. When the time came, how could he return it to his silly son? However, Qing Chimo took it seriously. He thought that old Qing was afraid of his mother, so he kept the beef tendons and the other things in his arms. Therefore he believed it without a doubt. He followed old Qing's footsteps and ran out of the door. The two of them were very fast and arrived at the gate of the manor in a moment. They didn't know if old Qing had arranged it in advance, but there were already 2 good horses waiting here. The father and son mounted the high horses together and rushed to Shao Mountain. The moment they left, waves of women's curses came from the Qing residence. The voice was loud and clear, sharp but not lacking in spirit. However, every sentence was related to Qing Yaojin and the ancestors of the Qing family. On the other hand, the father and son did not stop cursing along the way. Qing Chimo asked for the beef glue and the other things back because he thought that he had brought them here. How could he give them to others, not even his own father? Besides, what if Feng Zi went back on his word? Qing Yaojin, on the other hand, cursed Qing Chimo for being unfilial. He still had to fight with Lao Tzu for this little thing. In any case, he had made up his mind not to give it to his silly son. It wasn't that he wanted to snatch it, but he wanted to see if Feng Zi's divine bow was as awesome as Qing Chimo said. When the time came, he would decide whether to give it to him or not. Otherwise, what if he lost money? He wouldn't be able to explain it to the tigress when he returned. After sprinting all the way, the father and son finally arrived at the smithy. The temperature inside made Qing Yaojin unbearably hot. He wanted to turn around and leave several times, but when he thought of the divine bow, he stopped. He opened his clothes and dried his belly. He kept wiping the sweat on his forehead with his clothes. While wiping, he looked at Zhang Feng and said, Feng Zi, why is your damn place still so hot? When will the temperature drop? Zhang Feng smiled and pointed at the furnace in front of him. The high temperature here is mainly due to these furnaces. However, there is nothing we can do about it. If the temperature drops, where will the weapons be refined? In the end, we still have to start another furnace, right? Qing Yaojin curled his lips. He knew that Zhang Feng's words made sense, but he couldn't refute them. He could only change the topic. Then tell me about that divine bow of yours. I heard from Iron Bull that your divine bow is very powerful and can cut through gold and stone. Because of that, this dog talked about it the whole way in front of Lao Tzu and even went home to steal something. Stealing? Zhang Feng was stunned. So Iron Bull went home to steal something? Lao Tzu didn't instruct him. Could it be that old Qing thought that Lao Tzu instructed Iron Bull to do it? Thinking of this, he quickly looked at Qing Chimo. The latter also felt his burning gaze. He blushed and gave Zhang Feng a look. He signaled that he had been caught. Zhang Feng instantly understood. So this dog was caught by old Qing for stealing. No wonder old Qing followed him. It seemed that old Qing was suspicious of him. Thinking of this, he quickly looked at Qing Yaojin and explained, Old Qing, I didn't instruct him to do this. I know. Qing Yaojin waved his hand with a look of indifference. Iron Bull already told me. He wanted to go home to steal. Hearing this, Zhang Feng finally let out a sigh of relief. As long as he didn't suspect that he had instigated Iron Bull, it was fine. Although he wasn't afraid of old Qing, it wouldn't be good for his reputation if word got out. Back then, Lao Tzu had worked so hard to make a name for himself. He couldn't let this old guy ruin it. Just as he was about to explain, Qing Yaojin spoke again. How is your divine bow? Lao Tzu has already prepared the materials. Tell me. As he spoke, he opened his wet clothes. A stench of sweat wafted over. Cow glue, cow horns and other things appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Zhang Feng's eyes were green. Even though the stench of sweat spread throughout the cave, he didn't seem to feel it. He stared fixedly at the cow glue, unwilling to look away. Qing Yaojin saw all of this. He chuckled and rolled up the cow glue again, as if he was deliberately whetting everyone's appetite. How is it? Isn't this the best cow glue and cow horns? Zhang Feng felt that he hadn't seen enough, but the cow glue had already disappeared in front of his eyes. He rolled his eyes at old Cheng and said unhappily, "Yes, it's good stuff." Cheng Yaojin raised his head so high that he could see the hair on his nose. It was only because he now had the capital that he said arrogantly, "Tell me about your divine Bao." Chapter 1968. Zhang Feng smiled, thinking that old Cheng would admit defeat. He deliberately coughed twice and said with a smile, "My Bao is called a composite Bao. I told Iron Bull before that if the material is good, that is, if it is made of something like cow glue, it will have at least 200 stones of strength. If it is pulled, it will be able to pierce gold and break stone." He hadn't made it yet. What he said was just speculation, but it shouldn't be too far off. But in Cheng Yaojin's ears it was a little different. Although he had heard Iron Bull mention it once before, now that he heard Zhang Feng say it, he couldn't help but feel a little excited. If this thing was real, then he had to make one in advance. Thinking of this, he looked at Zhang Feng and said with a smile, "Fengzi, when will you start making it?" Zhang Feng glanced at the entrance of the cave. "Aren't we waiting for Buggy and Big Pancake? They haven't brought their materials yet." Hearing the materials, Cheng Yaojin quickly spread the clothes in front of Zhang Feng and said hurriedly, "What do you think of these materials?" A smell of sweat came. Zhang Feng quickly covered his nose, but he felt that it was not good. In order to care about old Cheng's face, he had to put down his hand and carefully check the materials. He just looked at it from a distance and didn't see it clearly. Now he had to take a good look. The raw materials would directly affect the finished product, so he couldn't be careless. Even if he didn't need these things, there would be some satisfaction in making them. Moreover, they might be used in the army in the future. He twisted a ball of cow glue with his hand and looked at it carefully. It was yellow with white and white with red. At first glance, it was a high-quality cow glue, but it was covered with old Cheng's sweat. He put down the cow glue in disgust and tried to smile. "This thing is good, but it's not complete. There are only cow horns, cow glue and donkey glue. These three things, so we have to wait for Buggy and the others." "These things aren't enough?" Cheng Yaojin asked subconsciously. He didn't know how many materials he needed before. If he knew, he would have moved all the materials from the warehouse. Of course not. Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Cheng Yaojin and said snappily, "I told Tainyo very clearly that I want cow horn, cow tendon, deer glue, horse glue, fish glue, rhinoceros glue and cow glue. A total of 7 materials. This time you brought 3 of them. How are you going to make them?" When Cheng Yaojin heard this, he felt that something was wrong. In the beginning, Iron Bull didn't tell him so much. He only said that he wanted cow horns, cow glue and the like. Why did so many things pop out now? He subconsciously looked at Cheng Chumo with a questioning look on his face. Cheng Chumo, on the other hand, was startled. He knew that this was his own fault and hurriedly said, "Father, when I entered the warehouse, I only found these 3 things. There was nothing else. You can't blame me." Cheng Yaojin sighed. This Iron Bull was really AF** King Cow. If there was nothing, he wouldn't tell Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu went out to think of a solution. Now he had to wait for the 2 dogs from Zhang Sun and Du family. Once they arrived, the things that belonged to the Qing family would be shared among the 3 families. How could he not be angry? Thinking of this, he wanted to go up and give this kid a big slap. But when he saw that Feng Zi was still beside him, he held back and gave this kid some face. So he snorted and turned to Zhang Feng. He smiled and said, "Feng Zi, let's not rush. Come, sit here and have some tea." Now that there was no other way, he could only try to please Feng Zi. As for whether it would be effective, he didn't know. Na Cheng thought that Zhang Feng didn't seem to fall for this. He just waved his hand and said, "You don't have to do this. Wait for Buggy and the others to do it." Hearing these words, Cheng Yaojin felt a chill in his heart, and his excitement instantly disappeared. However, he couldn't complain to Feng Zi, so he could only sit at the side and wait for the Zhang Sun family's dog. Cheng Chumo, seeing that old Cheng and Feng Zi didn't say anything, could only find a seat casually, always on guard against old Cheng's smacking. Zhang Feng just smiled and didn't say anything. He took out a cigarette from his waist, silently lit it and took a deep puff. It was as if cigarettes could send away all his troubles. Everyone was silent like this. After about 15 minutes, there was a burst of excited shouts from the entrance of the cave. Feng Zi were back. Without looking, he knew that it was Zhang Xuan's and Du Go's voices. Zhang Feng was about to get up and go forward, but Na Cheng thought that Cheng Yaojin seemed to be a little impatient. He took a few steps forward, tied up the dogs with one hand and shouted, "You 2 dogs, have you brought the materials?" Zhang Xuan's and Du Go's original plan was to brag in front of Feng Zi. Na Cheng thought that a burly man suddenly appeared in front of them, which scared them. They were about to curse, but when they took a closer look, They saw that it was the master of the Cheng family. Immediately, the two of them were so scared that their legs went soft. They said in a trembling voice, "Master Qin, why are you here?" Although they were not afraid of Qing Chumo, they were afraid of this devil. This was a person who had been on the battlefield and even dared to beat the emperor. They didn't have the guts to shout in front of this master. Even if their father was a high official in the imperial court, they had to bow their heads now. Chapter 1969. Qing Yaojin seemed to enjoy the two puppies admitting defeat. His eyes flashed with pride, but it was only for a moment. Soon, he glared at the two of them and said, "Lao Tzu just asked if you brought the materials. Did you stuff your ears?" "Big brother Qin, no. Old Master Qin. Dugo was so scared that his legs turned to jelly. He was already incoherent and couldn't remember anything about the materials. Luckily, Zhang Sun didn't completely lose his mind. He squeezed the rubber in his arms and said with a trembling voice, "Old Master Qin, it's here." Qing Yaojin glanced at the things in Zhang Sun's arms and was overjoyed. He wanted to snatch them away, but Zhang Sun seemed to be prepared. He pulled back his hand and Qing Yaojin missed. He was furious and stared at Zhang Sun. "Brat, give them to me." Zhang Sun was afraid of Qing Yaojin, but the rubber was something he took from home with great difficulty. How could he give it to someone else so easily? Moreover, this was Feng Zi's territory. He couldn't let this old thing do whatever he wanted. He thought for a while and said with a trembling voice, "I won't." Qing Yaojin was furious. No one had dared to say no to him for so many years. Now it was a junior. He reached out his hand and wanted to slap him. Zhang Sun's face turned pale. He knew how strong this old guy was. Back then, Tainyo was beaten half to death because of a small mistake. If it was him, he didn't even dare to think about it. He quickly turned his head and tried to dodge the slap. Dugo was also frightened. Even though he knew he wasn't the one being hit, he was still worried that the old thing's power would affect him. Therefore he hugged his head and squatted on the ground. He planned to get up when it was over. However, after squatting on the ground for a long time, he didn't see Zhang Sun scream. Did the Demon King let the bugs go? He was a little puzzled and secretly raised his head to take a look. Zhang Feng strode forward and grabbed Qing Yaojin's right hand that was about to fall. Qing Yaojin was a little annoyed. Who the hell dared to disturb Lao Tzu? He turned his head and saw that it was Zhang Feng. He immediately put on a smile and said, "Feng Zi, why are you here?" Zhang Feng saw that Qing Yaojin didn't intend to make a move, so he let go of his hand and tried to persuade him. "Old Qing, can you change your temper? Don't beat people up for no reason. Look at how badly Tainyo was beaten up by you. Now you want to beat others up?" Then, without waiting for Qing Yaojin's reaction, he looked at Zhang Sun Chong and Dugo and asked, "Have you brought your things?" Zhang Sun Chong and Dugo were quite frightened by Qing Yaojin, so they could only nod their heads. Zhang Feng glanced at the materials in their arms and didn't ask any questions. He directly took them and walked towards the furnace. As he walked, he said to everyone, "Come here, I need everyone's help." Zhang Sun Chong and Dugo glanced at Qing Yaojin. Seeing that the other party was still a little angry, they strode behind Zhang Feng. As they walked, they felt that something was wrong. There was a fat guy following beside them. Although this guy was fat, one side of his face was big and the other side was small. There were also red patches and green patches. Looking at his body shape, he looked a little like Tainyo. Thus, Zhang Sun Chong curiously looked at the guy who looked like Tainyo and asked, "Are you Tainyo?" Qing Chumo was a little angry. It was fine if the servants couldn't recognize Lao Tzu, but could it be that these guys couldn't recognize him? He was about to curse out loud, but after thinking about it, he decided not to. Old Qing had already bullied these guys, so he could only nod his head. Dugo was shocked. Wasn't this too different from the Tainyo from before? Previously he still looked a little like a human, but now he didn't look like a human at all. Who the hell hit him? Wasn't this too ruthless? He looked at Tainyo with an agitated expression and said with righteous indignation, "Tainyo, tell Lao Tzu who hit you. Buggy and I will definitely avenge you." He didn't dare to guarantee anything else, but he still had this bit of backbone. After all, his family had some power. Zhang Sun Chong also reacted. He looked at Qing Chumo with a shocked expression and put on the look of a good brother. "Tainyo, who did you say hit you?" Qing Chumo's heart warmed. As expected of a brother, he didn't befriend him for nothing. He was serious about it, but he didn't know if these guys would dare to hit old Qing. Thinking about it, he glanced at old Qing from the corner of his eye and didn't say anything. Anyway, the meaning was very clear. It was old Qing who hit him. If you have the guts, go ahead. Zhang Sun Chong and Dugo had been hanging out with Qing Chumo all year round, so how could they not know what this guy meant? When they saw that it was old Qing, their hearts sank. They looked at each other and said with a laugh, "So it was you who fell down. Then you can't blame others. Be careful." Yes, be careful. Cheng Chumo wanted to curse when he heard this. These two dogs had said nice things just now, but now that they saw that it was old Cheng, they were instantly terrified. They were indeed plastic brothers. He snorted coldly and knew that there was no hope for revenge. He quickly walked towards Zhang Feng, hoping to use the divine bow to make up for his psychological trauma. Chapter 1970. Zhang Feng was looking at the materials that the three of them had brought. He spread them out on the table and looked at them carefully. As he looked, he muttered, "This is beef tendon, beef gelatin, horse gelatin, fish gelatin, rhinoceros gelatin." He nodded with satisfaction, but when he saw the horn he frowned slightly. It's a pity that this horn isn't white. But a green one is fine too. It shouldn't be too different. Cheng Yaojin was a little anxious. "Fengzi, what's the difference between white and green?" He didn't want to use the materials that he had worked so hard to get to make a useless bow. Zhang Feng picked up the horn and looked at it. Then he put it on the table and smiled. "It doesn't have much of a difference. The white horn is a little harder, but the green horn isn't bad either. Comparatively speaking, there isn't much of a problem." Cheng Yaojin heaved a sigh of relief. As long as the bow wasn't weakened, it was fine. He hurriedly said, "Can we make it now?" Zhang Feng nodded and looked at Arjunan. "Go and find 5 big pots. Then pour the beef gelatin, horse gelatin, fish gelatin, rhinoceros gelatin, and deer gelatin into the pots. Add water and a small amount of lime and alkali and cook until the water is dry." Cook until the water is dry? Wouldn't that make the gelatin disappear? Cheng Yaojin looked at Zhang Feng worriedly. "Fengzi, it wasn't easy to find these things. You can't waste them." He didn't know the process of making the bow, but he felt that it was a waste of materials. Zhang Feng smiled and gave Cheng Yaojin a reassuring look. "Don't worry, it won't be a problem." Then he looked at Arjunan and said, "Do as I said." Arjunan nodded. He didn't have any doubts. After all, whatever the dean said was right. Even if he ate the beef gelatin, he still felt that it was right. So, he handed the beef gelatin and other materials to his subordinates and gave them some instructions. Then he looked at Zhang Feng and said, "Dean, I've already given the instructions. How's the Tuoba I asked you to send?" Zhang Feng thought of Tuamu and asked. Arkanon pointed outside the cave and said, "Dean, the wood is already outside the cave. We are waiting for your order." Zhang Feng glanced at the crowd and walked towards the door. "Let's go out and take a look." Everyone followed closely behind. They didn't know the production process of the bow, but if they watched today they might be able to learn something that could be useful in the future. Especially Cheng Yaojin, he had the mentality of secretly learning from the beginning. If he learned the production process, he might be able to make one for his subordinates. The group of people came to the outside of the cave, only to see hundreds of logs neatly arranged here. All of them were tuo wood. Zhang Feng glanced at them and showed a trace of satisfaction. Then he looked at Arkanon and said, "Go find a few people with saws and cut the wood into 3 types. The first type is 180 centimeters long and 8 centimeters wide. The second type is 150 centimeters long and 5 centimeters wide. The third type is 130 centimeters long and 3 centimeters wide." Zhang Feng kept telling Arkanon, but he didn't notice that Cheng Yaojin's eyes flashed with a trace of slyness. Although he didn't know the production process of the bow, he knew that the wood was the main material of the bow. This was common knowledge. And now, what Fengzi was talking about was the production process, the most important one. If he learned all of it, he might be able to make a bow in the future. Originally, he came with the mentality of secretly learning from Fengzi. Now that Fengzi didn't hide anything, it was easier to talk to him. Thinking about it, Cheng Yaojin said to Zhang Feng, "Fengzi, do you want me to go and help?" Zhang Feng looked at Cheng Yaojin in disbelief. He knew that this guy usually liked to be sneaky and lazy. Why did he take the initiative to help today? Could it be that he found his conscience? Or did he have other ideas? Cheng Chumo also looked at Cheng Yaojin in disbelief. Others didn't understand old Cheng, but how could he not? Usually he was too lazy to move at home. Why did he want to go and help today? He looked at Cheng Yaojin in confusion and was about to ask, but at this time Zhang Feng spoke. He looked at Cheng Yaojin curiously and asked, "Old Cheng, what's wrong with you today? Have you changed?" Cheng Yaojin chuckled and rubbed the back of his head. He purposely put on a naive look so that Zhang Feng wouldn't be able to tell what he was thinking. "That's not it. It's just that this old man often doesn't exercise at home, so my bones are a little loose. Seeing you guys exercise now, my hands are itchy." "Oh." Zhang Feng looked at Cheng Yaojin suspiciously. He still didn't believe it, but since he had already said so, it wasn't good to refuse. Besides, one more person meant one more strength and they could make it sooner. So he nodded. That's fine. Go and help them. Cheng Yaojin nodded, but he didn't immediately go to find the workers. Instead, he turned to Cheng Chumo and frowned. Kid, let's go and saw wood with Lao Tzu. Chapter 1971. Two people working together was always better than one. If he didn't remember the process, at least he still had this silly son of his. Unfortunately, Cheng Chumo didn't seem to understand what he meant. With a face full of reluctance, he said, Dad, if you want to saw the wood, you can go. Why do you have to drag me along? Look at my injuries, why? Cut the *king crap. Cheng Yaojin grabbed Cheng Chumo and didn't wait for him to finish speaking. Like an eagle grabbing a chick, he grabbed a saw and handed it to Cheng Chumo. Quickly saw for Lao Tzu. Cheng Chumo felt a little wronged. He felt that he had offended Tai Sui today. Why did he have to be involved in everything? He also had to be threatened by old Cheng. Most importantly, he didn't dare to resist. He could only pick up the saw and start sawing like the worker next to him. Seeing this, Cheng Yaojin laughed in satisfaction. He picked up a saw and patted the worker next to him. Hey brother, how do you use this thing? The worker looked at Cheng Yaojin as if he was looking at an idiot. He thought to himself, since you don't know, why are you still pretending? He snorted, turned around and ignored him. After being ignored, Cheng Yaojin had an awkward expression. He could only watch others sawing while he sawed. Zhang Feng, who was at the side, saw all of this. Just now, he was wondering why old Cheng had suddenly changed. Now he understood that this old guy was planning to secretly learn a little and then go back to make it. He had a good plan, but could he learn it? Zhang Xuan's eyes were sharp, so he naturally saw it. He leaned over to Du Go's ear and whispered, De Bing, look, Tainyo and Lao Tzu are going to help. Why don't we go too? Du Go was a little confused. With a face full of reluctance, he said, they can go, but why do we have to go too? Idiot. Zhang Sun flicked Du Go's head and said with some anger, didn't you see how cunning old Cheng is? He's obviously trying to steal it. Let's steal it too. We'll definitely benefit from it. Secretly learning? Du Go suddenly understood. No wonder old Cheng looked so strange just now. In the end, it turned out that this old fellow was going to steal it. He finally understood and hurriedly said, what you said makes sense. Then let's go over? Zhang Sun nodded his head and looked at Zhang Feng. He put on a smile and said, Feng Zi, can we also go and help? You guys are going too? Zhang Feng said subconsciously. He originally thought that old Cheng was the only one who had this idea. It seemed that this bug also had some evil ideas in its heart. It also wanted to secretly learn. However, even if they wanted to secretly learn, they wouldn't be able to learn anything now. One more person would mean more work. After thinking for a while, he said, that's fine too. Let's go. Hearing this, Zhang Sun was so happy that he almost jumped up. It seemed that this fellow Feng Zi still didn't know anything. It was a good opportunity for him to steal some techniques. With this thought, he quickly walked over to Cheng Chumo. Du Go naturally didn't want to fall behind. They had clearly agreed on this just now. How could he give up? Thus, the two of them and Cheng Chumo started to play together again. Cheng Chumo was naturally happy that Zhang Sun had brought these two people here. Just now, he had been forcefully recruited by his father to be a coolie. He had originally been depressed, but now there were two silly boys to accompany him. What a good thing this was. Thinking of this, the saw in his hand began to grind violently. However, this Tuamu seemed to be deliberately going against him. No matter how much strength he used, he didn't move at all. He was a little dissatisfied. He rolled up his sleeves and the muscles on his chest began to tremble. Only then did Tuamu admit defeat and slowly began to split. The others were also struggling a little, especially Zhang Sun and Du Go. They were originally high and mighty noblemen. When had they ever done such rough work? They didn't even know how to use the saw. After asking Cheng Chumo for a while, they finally understood the mystery behind it. Only then did they slowly begin to saw. However, after just a while, large blisters appeared on their hands and they cried out in pain. This caused Cheng Yaojin to laugh at them. He was originally a soldier, and killing enemies on the battlefield wasn't a problem, let alone this small piece of wood. Although there was a little problem just now, it didn't affect the results at all. After a while, he finished sawing several pieces of wood. He picked up the wood and looked at Zhang Feng with a proud expression. Feng Zi, how is it? Is this enough? Zhang Feng had just lit up a cigarette and was about to take a few puffs to relieve his nerves when his gaze was attracted by this guy. He thought to himself, isn't it just sawing a few pieces of wood? What's there to show off? As he thought this, he still smiled. Not bad, not bad. Keep up the good work. As the saying goes, if you want a good ox to plow the land, you need to encourage it. Old Qing was obviously such a person. If you didn't say a few nice words, he might just quit after hearing it. Of course, this was only under normal circumstances. Now, if he wanted to secretly learn from him, he would still work hard, but there was no lack of encouragement. Chapter 1972. As expected, Qing Yaojin was very pleased when he heard this. He glanced at the crowd and acted like a leader. He ordered arrogantly, "How is everyone sawing? Put away the wooden sticks in your hands and let Feng Zi see if they can be used. Otherwise his mother will wither later." It had to be said that old Qing had some leadership skills. He knew to show some to Zhang Feng first. Everyone glanced at Qing Yaojin with disdain and picked up the wooden sticks in front of them. It wasn't that they were afraid of Qing Yaojin. They were all workers in the workshop and didn't know who this person in front of them was. Why would they be afraid? It was only when they heard this guy mention the dean that they felt that it made sense. Otherwise, who would care what nonsense he was talking about? The wooden sticks were placed in front of Zhang Feng. He glanced at them and gestured a few times with his hands. After confirming that there were no problems, he said, "There are no problems with the wooden sticks. They are basically enough. Everyone stop what you are doing." When everyone heard this, they stopped their saws and looked at Zhang Feng seriously. Zhang Feng glanced at everyone and continued, "Let's continue with the next step. You guys go and find some dry wood." After saying that, he looked at Algernon. "Go and find some silk thread. It must be thick and strong." After saying that, everyone left to do their own work. Qing Yaojin rubbed his hands and looked at Zhang Feng expectantly. "Feng Zi, what do you need me to do?" He was prepared to secretly learn. It was a critical moment now, so he naturally didn't want to be idle. Zhang Feng seemed to see through him and smiled. "Why don't you go and pick up some dry wood? We need it later." Pick up dry wood? The corner of Qing Yaojin's mouth twitched. Lao Tzu was here to secretly learn, okay? Let Lao Tzu go and pick up firewood? How was that possible? He crossed his arms and pursed his lips. "Isn't there someone else going? I'll wait here." Zhang Feng naturally knew that this guy didn't want to go, so he didn't care so much. He smiled and smoked again. On the other hand, Zhang Sun and the others were a little uncomfortable. They sat together and looked at each other's hands, trying to pick up the bubbles with their saws. It was like a scene where baboons were looking for lice on each other's bodies. Seeing this, Zhang Feng burst into laughter and almost choked on his cigarette. Not long after, Arkanon came back with the thread. "Dean, I've brought it." Zhang Feng nodded and asked, "How's the beef gelatin?" "It'll take a while. That thing is too hard to endure. It won't dissolve for a while." Algernon was a little embarrassed. He thought that the workers were not working hard enough. "I'm fine." Zhang Feng waved his hand and took a puff of his cigarette. He didn't mind. "Let it simmer. The longer it simmers, the better. It'll become more viscous." Beef gelatin had to be used as soon as it came out of the pot. Otherwise, it would stick together very quickly, just like glutinous rice. However, beef gelatin was more powerful than glutinous rice. Once it was cold, it would stick together. It couldn't be torn apart. It was comparable to super glue. Arjunon did not know about these things. He had just returned to the cave to take a look. He smiled and said, "The dean is right. I just went back to the cave to take a look. It's still boiling. I think it will take a while." As soon as he finished speaking, the workers came back in twos and threes. They were all holding firewood and piling it next to the sticks. One of them asked, "Dean, what do we do now?" Zhang Feng glanced at the crowd. "Light the firewood, then place the sticks over the fire to form a bow." Wood was relatively hard. If it was broken, it would definitely break. If it was placed over the fire, it would evaporate the water and help form the bow. When Qing Yaojin heard Zhang Feng's words, he volunteered to run to the front of the crowd to help. Cheng Chimo naturally didn't want to go. How could he, the young master of the Cheng family, stoop to such a dirty thing? However, his father's murderous gaze made him give in. He reluctantly went to help. Zhang Sun was also smart. When he saw old Qing go, he quickly followed. Anyway, he had made up his mind. As long as old Qing did something, he would do it. He didn't believe that he wouldn't be able to learn anything. At most, they would all work for Feng Zi. He wouldn't lose anything anyway. Zhang Feng was naturally happy to see this happen. One more person meant a little more strength. Anyway, he wouldn't lose anything. He wasn't afraid of these people secretly learning from him. After all, it wasn't easy to learn. Therefore, he generously instructed everyone to operate. You start the fire. Old Qing is strong. Prepare to put the sticks over the fire and make them into a bow. Also, Tainyo, don't F*** King lays around here. You go too. Do go and pick up the sticks for them. After everything was arranged, Zhang Feng lit a cigarette and sat down to smoke slowly. He felt that everything had nothing to do with him. Anyway, he had already assigned the task to these guys and told them the method. Whether they could do it well or not was up to these guys. He wasn't worried that these guys would cause trouble. After all, this was all done for them. They wouldn't harm themselves. Chapter 1973. Qing Yaojin was also working with a serious face. Since he had decided to learn from Zhang Heng secretly, he would carry it out to the end. He called out to Qing Chumo. Ignoring the ashes on his face, he picked up a piece of wood and stirred it over the fire. With a gentle tug, he tied it with a silk thread. The whole project was completed. After about a quarter of an hour, he pushed the handle of the bow and considered it a success. Cheng Chumo randomly picked one of them and held it in front of Zhang Feng. He smiled and said, "Fengzi, take a look. Is this okay?" Zhang Feng looked up and saw that Cheng Chumo's face was covered with ashes, as if he had just burned charcoal. Combined with his bruised and swollen face, he looked like a fat pig, a black fat pig. This made Zhang Feng laugh. Cheng Chumo was puzzled. He looked at Zhang Feng curiously and asked, "Fengzi, what are you laughing at?" "Nothing." Zhang Feng held back his laughter and tried not to look at Cheng Chumo's face. Otherwise, he was sure that he would not be able to control himself. He took the bow handle in Cheng Chumo's hand and looked at it seriously. The bow handle was the most important step. There could not be any mistakes. Otherwise, it would break with a gentle pull. After looking at it for a while and making sure that there was no problem, he handed the bow handle back to Cheng Chumo. "It's okay. Are you all done?" Cheng Chumo nodded. "All done. There are 20 in total. What should we do now?" Zhang Feng stood up and glanced at the bow handles on the ground. He said to everyone, "Take the bow handles. Let's go back to the cave. Remember to put out the fire." After that, he turned and went back to the cave. Everyone quickly picked up the bow handles and followed him. Back in the cave, Zhang Feng first took a look at the rubber. Seeing that it was not ready yet, he called Arkanon to his side and said seriously, "Go and make some pulleys like this." As he spoke, he took out a piece of paper from the table and began to draw with a pen. As he drew, he said, "Remember, this pulley is round. I've already drawn how big it is for you. As for the materials, I'll use steel and rubber. There are 2 types of materials in total. Go and make some with these 2 materials first." Alkinon was a little confused. This was the first time he had seen such a novel thing, and it was even on paper. Logically speaking, he was quite knowledgeable, but after looking at it for a long time, he still couldn't figure out what it was or what it could be used for. However, according to the dean's logic, it should be used on bows and arrows. But how was this thing supposed to be used? It had nothing to do with bows and arrows. He was puzzled and asked subconsciously, "Dean, what is this useful for?" Zhang Feng didn't stop until he finished the last stroke. He handed the drawing to Arkanon and said seriously, "This will be used on the bow later." On the bow. Arkanon was even more confused. This was just a round thing. How was he going to add it to the bow? With a puzzled look, he asked, "Dean, how do you add it?" Zhang Feng didn't want to explain so much. After all, Arkanon didn't need it at all. However, seeing how eager Arkanon was to learn, he still said, "This is called a pulley. Wait a minute, this will be on both sides of the bow. This will increase the tension of the bow handle." While the two were talking, Qing Yaojin, who was not far away, saw everything. He strode forward and put his hand on Zhang Feng's shoulder. He smiled and said, "Fengzi, what are you talking about?" Zhang Feng took half a step back with a look of disdain. This guy's sweat stink was too strong. It was better to stay away from him or he would be smoked into bacon. After standing still, he coughed softly and said, "I'm discussing the bow with Arkanon." "What's wrong? Do you want to hear it too?" "That's not it." Qing Yaojin naturally wouldn't admit it. After all, it wouldn't be good for his reputation. He waved his hand and pretended not to care. "I'm just here to see if there's anything I can help with." "No, you can go now." Zhang Feng was a little impatient. It wasn't because of anything else but because this guy smelled too strong. Just now he was sweating in the cave sawing wood outside, and now he was sweating all over again. The smell could be smelled from 3 feet away. However, Qing Yaojin didn't think so. He was like a piece of dog skin plaster. He pretended not to hear Zhang Feng and still stood beside him. Zhang Feng saw that it didn't work, but there was no other way. He knew that this guy was here for the blueprint. He could only continue to talk to Arkanon about the pulley. When Qing Yaojin heard this, his ears instantly perked up. However, the more he listened, the more he felt that something was wrong. Fengzi seemed to be planning to make a pulley and install it on the bow. What kind of bow and arrow would contain such a strange item? It had never been seen before. Could this Fengzi be up to no good? He thought for a moment and couldn't help but ask, Fengzi, what's this pulley for? Are you really going to install it on the bow? Is it useful? Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Qing Yaojin and said angrily, it's not up to you to judge whether it's useful or not. Since I dare to do this, of course I'm confident. Chapter 1974. He had guessed that old Qing would ask this question. After all, this composite bow was too advanced. Many people had thought about it, let alone seen it. It wasn't strange for old Qing to have such a reaction. It was just that this guy was having a headache. However, Qing Yaojin didn't seem to realize that he was meddling in other people's business. He continued to ask, Feng, I'm just concerned. We've worked so hard for so long. Naturally, we have to understand the process. Understand the process? Zhang Feng sneered in his heart. This old guy was really good at pretending. He obviously wanted to secretly learn it, but he still made it sound so dignified. If it weren't for the fact that there were so many people around, he really wanted to piss this guy awake. After thinking about it, he suppressed the resentment in his heart and said seriously, I told you just now that the pulley is definitely useful. You'll know later. It's useless to say so much to you now. After saying that, he looked at Arkanon and said seriously, go and make it now. I'll use it later. Arkanon nodded and looked deeply at Qing Yaojin before leaving. Qing Yaojin was a little anxious. He had come here to look at the blueprint. Now that the blueprint had been taken away by Alkinen, how could he still look at it? Just as he was about to chase after Alkinen, he was pulled back by Zhang Feng. He said impatiently, Feng, why are you pulling me? Zhang Feng looked at Qing Yaojin with a smile. Old Qing, what's the use of chasing after Arkanon? If you want the blueprint, I can give it to you later. Can you not cause trouble? Otherwise, don't blame me if you can't make the bow. Arkanon was now looking for someone to make it. If old Qing went, he would definitely ruin it. If he delayed, he would definitely cause trouble again. It was better to give him some benefits first. After all, the blueprint was useless. When Qing Yaojin heard that the blueprint was going to be given to him, he jumped up in excitement. He didn't care about Arkanon anymore and grabbed Zhang Feng excitedly. Feng, this is yours. Don't go back on your word. Zhang Feng nodded. He thought to himself, what can you do with a blueprint? This pulley could only be used in the industrial industry. It had no other uses, so it didn't matter if it was given away. But Qing Yaojin didn't know that. He thought that he had picked up a treasure and kept thanking Zhang Feng. Qing Yaojin's body had a strong smell to begin with. As soon as he got close to Zhang Feng, he instantly felt a burst of sour smell assailing his nostrils. He hurriedly found an excuse to escape, found a quiet place to smoke, and ignored this guy. About a quarter of an hour later, Alkinen came over with a few pulleys. Sir, it's done. As he spoke, he handed the pulley to Zhang Feng. Zhang Feng took the pulley and studied it. Although it was a little different from what he had previously drawn, the difference was not too great. It should be usable. He nodded with satisfaction. This is good. Go and see if the glue is ready. If it is, take it all out. Alkinen took the order and left. After a while, he came back with a basin filled with glue. Sir, it's ready. Take a look. Zhang Feng lowered his head and glanced at it. He put his hand into the basin and stirred it. Then he put it in his mouth. He couldn't help but look satisfied. The taste is not bad. No wonder rich people like to use this stuff. Thinking about it, he said to Alkinen, this stuff is not bad. Get ready. Bring the bow handles, the beef tendons, and everything else. As soon as he finished speaking, Qing Yaojin jumped high and said arrogantly, I'll go get the things. As he spoke, he had already picked up a pile of bow handles and placed them in front of Zhang Feng. Alkinen also went to prepare the beef tendons and other things. Not long after, everyone was gathered and everything was ready. Zhang Feng glanced at everyone and said seriously, Old Qing, take the bow handle. When I tell you to loosen the thread, loosen it. Alkinen, apply the beef tendons. Everyone nodded with a serious expression. They knew that this was the most important time and didn't dare to be negligent, especially Qing Yaojin. He had originally planned to learn, but now he was even more focused. His eyes were wide open as if he was ready to spend half his life on this. Zhang Feng checked again to make sure there were no problems. Then he said, Old Qing, loosen the thread on the bow handle. Qing Yaojin nodded and tried to loosen the thread. However, it seemed like the thread was against him. He couldn't loosen it no matter how hard he tried. He was a little anxious and used all his strength to pull it off. Luckily, the bow handle wasn't damaged. However, Zhang Feng still rolled his eyes at him. Can't you use less strength? If you're strong enough, you can go pick up dung. After he finished speaking, he didn't wait for Qing Yaojin's reaction. He looked at Alkinen and said, "Cut the two ends of the bow handle into two slits. It must be big enough for the pulley to fit in." Alkinen finally understood what the dean meant. However, he only knew one part of it and didn't know the other part. It wasn't good to ask now, so he took out a tool and cut the two ends of the bow handle. Chapter 1975. The others were confused as well, but they knew it was not the time to ask questions. They kept their mouths shut and focused on the bow in Arkinen's hands, trying to figure out the secret behind it. The wood was very hard, and it took Arkinan a lot of effort to separate the two ends. He raised the bow with a serious face and said to Zhang Feng, "Director, is this okay?" Zhang Feng looked at it carefully and confirmed that there was no problem. He said, "No problem. Now put the pulley in. Put the steel pulley in. Remember, put the pulley on both ends." Arkinan nodded and tried hard to separate the two ends, but there was no room for the pulley. He had no choice but to ask Qing Chimo for help. "Brother Iron Bull, please help me." Qing Chimo was happy to help. He picked up the pulley and put it in. However, the hole Arkinan had made was too narrow. He had to use all his strength to put it in. Seeing that all the work was done, Zhang Feng continued, "Now put the beef tendon on both ends of the bow handle. It must be long. First, wrap it around the pulley, then around the teeth of the pulley, and finally around the bowstring. The last loop is also the most important one, which is the last bowstring. Therefore, they must complement each other and must not be interrupted midway." Hearing this, everyone couldn't help but be secretly speechless. Beef tendon on the pulley? 3 loops? The bowstring is the last loop? That's too much pressure, isn't it? No wonder it was said that the bow needed 200 stones of strength to draw. That's the logic. Qing Yaojin was an experienced soldier, but this was the first time he had seen a bow like this. The bows in the barracks all had 1 string. None of them had 3 strings like Feng Zi's. Although 2 of them were useless, the power of a real bowstring was still very strong. He was just guessing. However, based on his experience in the army, the power of the bow must be very strong. The 3 strings alone were not something an ordinary person could draw. But wasn't it too exhausting? Could it be used? He was confused. "Feng Zi," he asked, "isn't the 3 strings a bit too much? Normally it can't be used." He was worried that Iron Bull wouldn't be able to use the bow when the time came. Furthermore, he was preparing to make some for the soldiers. How could he use them when the pressure was so great? Unexpectedly, Zhang Feng said, "Old Qing, you are so strong. What are you worried about?" Qing Yaojin smiled awkwardly. He couldn't possibly say that he wanted to steal their skills, so he had to find an excuse. "I'm just worried that Iron Bull and Bug won't be able to use it." Before Zhang Feng could reply, Qing Chimo jumped out. He seemed to be unable to accept old Cheng's mockery, and looked unconvinced. "Who said I can't use it? I can use it." Although he didn't know what his father was planning, he could tell from his father's words that he didn't want to give it to him. How could he agree to that? Slap! Qing Yaojin slapped Qing Chimo on the head and said resentfully, "F***ck off. What do you know? Lao Tzu and Feng Zi are talking. Is there any place for you to interrupt?" As he spoke, he slapped Qing Chimo on the head again. Qing Chimo was probably scared by the slap. He kept retreating and didn't dare to interrupt. Everyone looked at him sympathetically and mourned for him for 3 seconds. They hoped that there wasn't such a father in heaven. After venting, Qing Yaojin was in a good mood. He looked at Zhang Feng and continued the topic. "Feng Zi, what I meant was that this thing is good. I'm just worried that these puppies won't be able to use it." Zhang Feng didn't quite understand. He said with a smile, "Don't worry. Didn't I ask you to make one? 8-meter tall one, 5-meter tall and 1 3-meter tall bow handles? Naturally, they won't be able to draw this one. 8-meter tall bow, but there are still 1 5-meter tall ones. 1 5-meter tall ones?" Qing Yaojin's neck tilted. A 1 8-meter tall bow was too stressful. A 1 5-meter tall one should be no problem. Moreover, the soldiers in the military camp should be able to use it. Thinking about it, he picked up the bow handle and gestured. "Feng Zi, this is 1 5-meter tall, right?" Zhang Feng nodded. "That's right. This is 1 5-meter tall. Iron Bull and the others can use it." Qing Yaojin was delighted and quickly said, "Then hurry up and make it." Zhang Feng rolled his eyes at Qing Yaojin and said, "Then what are you waiting for? Put the bowstring on both ends of the bow handle." Qing Yaojin said, "Oh." He didn't care about Zhang Feng's dissatisfied expression. He turned to Qing Chimo and the others and snorted. "Iron Bull, come and pull the tendons. Worm and Debing, come and help. You 3 want to eat ready-made puppies. Don't be idle. Cheng Chimo had already been traumatized by Cheng Yaojin's words, and this snort made him shiver. He didn't dare to disobey his father's orders, so he could only obediently go to help. Zhang Sun, Chong, and Du Go didn't plan to help because they knew their own strength. The bowstring was so strong. How could they pull it? Chapter 1976. Wasn't this courting death? However, they were also afraid of old Cheng's abuse of power, so they could only reluctantly step forward to help. Cheng Yaojin's face was full of joy. As he pulled the two ends of the bow, he instructed the three guys, Come, Tainyo, set the bowstring. Buggy, pull this side. Debing, don't just stand there. Pull this side. Make sure it's tight. Although he had never made a bow before, even if he hadn't eaten pork before, hadn't he seen pigs run? He still had a little bit of common sense. He still knew that the bowstring had to be pulled tight. Zhang Sun, Chong, and Du Go didn't dare to disobey Cheng Yaojin's orders, so they could only use all their strength. However, this was a cow tendon, not a rubber band. How could it be pulled so easily? The two of them gritted their teeth. They wished they could use all their strength, but the cow tendon still didn't budge. Alkinen saw that the situation wasn't right and hurriedly went forward to help. Only then did the two of them feel better. However, the cow tendon was still a little loose and didn't meet the requirements of the bowstring. Zhang Feng was anxious as he watched from the side. He also hurriedly helped. He even called out to Cheng Chimo, Tainyo, are you King standing there waiting for death? Come up and help. Tainyo had pulled the cow tendon and was just standing there playing with it. He didn't know how to come up and help. This made him want to go up and give him a kick. If it weren't for this critical moment, he might have already gone up to fight. Cheng Chimo was also quite intelligent. When he heard Feng Zi's call and saw that everyone was sweating, he hurriedly came up to help. There was strength in numbers. The cow tendon seemed to be afraid of everyone's strength. It slowly began to submit and tighten. Zhang Feng looked at the cow tendon that was getting thinner and thinner. He suddenly shouted, Everyone stop. Old Cheng will immediately buckle the cow tendon. Hearing this, everyone immediately stopped, but they didn't let go. Cheng Yaojin grabbed one end and tied it to one end. His speed was so fast that it made people speechless. Soon he grabbed the other end and tied it up. Only then did he let out a long breath. As soon as Cheng Yaojin put down the bow, Cheng Chimo couldn't wait to pick it up. His mouth kept exclaiming. It seemed that he wanted to test the bowstring. Zhang Feng was about to stop him, but Cheng Chimo's right hand was already on the bowstring. He was about to pull it, but unexpectedly the bowstring was abnormally tight. No matter how hard he tried, the bowstring didn't move at all. Zhang Feng could only persuade him, Tainyo, put it down first. You can't pull it apart now, no? Cheng Chimo flatly refused. He looked at Zhang Feng a little unconvinced. You're looking down on me. I want to pull it apart today. He had been looking forward to it for a long time. Now that the bow had a prototype, of course he wanted to be the first to try it. In the end, this Fengzi looked down on him and said that he couldn't pull it apart? Was he laughing at him? He couldn't let this guy look down on him. Thinking about this, he gritted his teeth and used all his strength. This time it was the same as before. The bowstring still didn't move at all. He was a little suspicious. He was also quite strong. Why couldn't he pull it apart at all? Was Fengzi's bowstring really that awesome? Just as he was thinking, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head. He quickly turned around. He saw his father looking at him angrily. He was a little scared and said submissively, Dad, you. Before he finished speaking, another slap came. Cheng Yaojin's eyes widened. His hand was in the air. If you can't pull it apart, then don't embarrass Lao Tzu here. Give it to me. As he spoke, Cheng Yaojin grabbed the bow and made a gesture to pull it. Zhang Feng's expression changed. The bow hadn't taken shape yet. It was fine to let Tainyo pull it, but if old Chen also tried, it would definitely break. Thus he hurriedly pulled Cheng Yaojin and shouted, Old Chen, you can't try. The bow hasn't taken shape yet. It will break. It's going to break? Cheng Yaojin quivered. He was a little scared. But after thinking about it, he felt that something was wrong. Tainyo was pulling it, so why would it break when he pulled it? Just now, when Tainyo pulled it, he didn't say anything. Why was he so talkative when he wanted to pull it? Was there something strange about it? He frowned and asked with a little dissatisfaction, Fengzi, don't tell me you have a problem with me? Just now, when Tainyo pulled it, you didn't break it. Why did you open your mouth when I wanted to pull it? Zhang Feng was a little helpless. He clearly wanted to open his mouth, but before he could, Tainyo had already pulled it. Why did he blame it on him? He said helplessly, when Tainyo pulled it, I already opened my mouth to stop him. It was this guy who didn't listen to me. What can I do? Qing Yaojin's eyes turned and recalled the situation just now. Did Feng Zi open his mouth? It seemed like he did, right? But this